So no, okay, we go. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, should I start over?
Yes. Sorry.
Welcome again on behalf of the Moral Psychology Research Group. Thanks to everybody for coming. I don't want to keep us long from this great slate of talks, but I am happy to see some new faces here tonight. And we hope to see lots more of you. For a long time, we've had this idea that this little ragtag conspiracy that's the Moral Psychology Research Group ought to evolve towards something more like a real international scholarly society, and we've continued fitfully working towards that goal, and we hope to have some good news for you all about that soon. So stay tuned. And now I'll turn it over to Thomas, our organizer, and ask that you join me in thanking him for doing all the work to make this happen.
Yeah, sure. No problem. All right. I'm going to set this up for Josh. First, I'll go introduce a couple things, and then I'll have to set up the permissions and unpin some things. So Josh is going to be the only person we're looking at in just a couple seconds. First, I've got to reshare the screen to go over some of the sort of basic background information. So tonight, just so everyone knows what we're doing, we've got a talk first by Josh Green. I'll introduce him in a minute. Then we have a talk by Milton Musil. And then Paul Bloom will receive the inaugural Stephen P. Stitch Award. Tomorrow morning, there's a data blitz in the morning. That's 11 o'clock. So we have some very talented post-backs, some postdocs, and some grad students that are going to be giving some 10-minute long talks in the morning. So I hope you can join us to help uh, spread the word about their exciting new research. And then tomorrow afternoon, we've got Joanna Dimery Cotton. That'll start roughly at 12:30, depending on how this goes. Paolo Sergio Boggio, and then Linda Skitka will give the keynote address. As far as the format of the talks, so there's a little bit different. So the sort of main program talks tonight, that'll be Green and Usul. These are going to be 20 minutes, and then afterwards there'll be a 10-minute Q&A for the keynote addresses. So tonight, tomorrow for Bloom and Skitka's talks, these will be an hour long talks roughly with 30-minute Q&As, and the data blitz talks tomorrow. We've decided to make it less blitzy so they have more time. And in order to make it possible for them to have more time, we're not going to entertain any questions for those talks. Okay, as far as the participation goes, so right now you're all able to unmute yourselves. That's going to go away in a couple seconds so people can't mess up the audio during the middle of people's talk. So I'm going to mute you in just a couple seconds. And you'll be able to unmute yourselves during the Q&A sessions. So once that time comes, please raise your hand. I'll try to moderate the questions. We'll go in order of their appearance. Please be mindful, we don't have a ton of time for people to ask questions. I'll get through as many as we can in the allotted time. Please limit yourself to one question. John said this earlier, which is funny. Make sure that your one question is actually a question. That would also be would make things much easier and speed things along. If you ask a question, please leave your hand raised until the speakers finish responding. Otherwise, you're going to disappear off his screen. And so it'll just make it a little bit easier for him to pay attention to where you are and sort of look at you if your hand is raised until the end. If we don't have time to fill any of your questions, we apologize for that. You can obviously leave your comment or question in the chat. You can also send it directly in the chat to the speaker. Okay, so now I'll introduce Josh real quick, and then I got to pin a couple things, and we'll be ready to start. Okay, so Josh Green is professor of psychology at Harvard University. For the past 25 years, he's been doing groundbreaking research on the mechanics of moral thinking and high-level cognition more generally. In his book, Moral Tribes, Emotion, Reason, and the Gap Between Us and Them, back in 2013, Professor Green diagnosed and discussed the origins and perils of moral tribalism, and he laid out an empirically informed and philosophically sophisticated way of thinking about the issues that divide us and how we might move past them to build a better world for everyone despite our sometimes deep differences. Given how polarized societies are becoming around the world, and indeed, I don't even think Josh could have imagined back in 2010 that things would be as bad as they are, this kind of interdisciplinary and applied research has become increasingly timely and important. So I'm excited to hear about Professor Green's latest research on depolarization. So please join me in welcoming Professor Josh Green.
All right. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Yeah, and
Let me
it's gonna give me one sec. I'm gonna be unpinning people, and then you should just be the only person. There we go.
all right. Does this let me try to get it so that I can at least see some faces so that I don't feel like I'm talking to a building directory. Um, all right. Um, so can you, let's see, are we getting full screen? Everyone seeing slides?
Yep.
Good. Thank
Yep.
you for
Yep.
your thumbs. Yeah, that's very reassuring. Okay. So we're all set? Ready to
Yes.
go?
Perfect.
Okay,
Go ahead.
great. Thanks. So, really delighted to be here and delighted to have a chance to connect with so many of you. Thanks so much for showing up on a Friday evening, at least here on U.S. East Coast time. As Thomas mentioned, there's been a bit of an evolution in terms of my interests, but there is a kind of a continuity here. I mean, I felt like when my book Moral Tribes came out over 10 years ago, after it was published, it felt increasingly like a promissory note. That is, I did this work really aimed at trying to get underneath our moral intuitions with the goal of having a better moral philosophy. And the hope was that having a better moral philosophy would then allow us to put those ideas into action and solve the world's problems. And the world's problems, I don't know. I mean, they were always there, but they feel more close to home and urgent than they did for me for many years. And I started thinking more and more about how can we take what we know or what we think we know about human nature and apply it directly to solving our biggest problems. And from my point of view, the problem behind all of our biggest problems is really intergroup conflict, which in you can think of as political polarization in the United States and elsewhere as part of that. What I call tribalism with some asterisks there about what I mean and don't mean by that term. And so this work is after many years, an effort to put those principles to work and see if we can really bridge the divides that are tearing the United States apart and other countries and in many ways the world. So there we go. So the challenge here really needs no introduction. In the United States, for example, people don't only think of the political opposition as people they disagree with, but as enemies, people who are evil, people who can't be trusted, people who we can't respect. And my worry is that if we don't get past that, we're going to be in even worse shape that we're in. And a lot of people think the United States is headed towards civil war. I hope that's not true, but I shudder to think where we could be in a year or two. So desperately working to try to bridge those divides. Okay. So how do we do this? This is really sort of my one background psychology slide. When I started thinking about this, I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll have some big new theory of conflict resolution. And the more I looked at the research and the more I thought about it, I came to the conclusion that a lot of old ideas really are the ones that make the most sense. On the biological side, the idea is that everything is really about mutually beneficial cooperation. That's what that builds and sustains living systems, from molecules forming cells and cells forming organisms and organisms forming groups and tribes and chiefdoms and nations and occasionally United Nations. And the suggestion there is that if you want to take groups that are at odds with each other, you need to put them on the same team and have that team succeed and have the benefits distributed, and that's what knits the world together. And then a lot of classic social science points in the same direction. And I'm thinking about Allport's contact theory and the classic work on cooperation and conflict by people like Sharif and others with better data in the realistic conflict tradition and so on and so forth. And so the premise here is that the way to bring people together is to create a situation where teamwork is required and teamwork benefits everybody. So more specifically, what do we need if we're going to dent our tribalism problem? Well, we need things that are effective, and as I've said, for me, the thing that I would expect to be most effective is things that involve a kind of teamwork. And we do see evidence for that in programs like Braver Angels and Seeds of Peace have been evaluated using this kind of a technique. A challenge with a lot of these programs is that they work well for the people who participate, but the people who participate, they're highly self-selected. They're people who are already willing to sort of do a courageous dialogue thing, and they don't scale very easily. So we need things that are more scalable, but not everything that's scalable works. Bale and colleagues had this now famous, infamous study where they had people get tweets from the political opposition, and for Democrats, it did nothing, and for Republicans, it made them hate Democrats even more. So everything that that could work digitally doesn't necessarily work. Volkel and colleagues recently move things forward in a great way by trying to find things that are effective and scalable. And they highlighted a number of strategies that meet that mark, and a couple of things even, the effects lasted a couple of weeks, and that's great. But there's another piece of this which Alex Landry and Eran Halperin have put their finger on, which they call the motivational challenge. That is, even if you have something that works, and even if it's scalable in the sense of being digital and accessible, if people aren't motivated to engage with it, it's not going to go very, very far. You could have people watch a video about political violence, but that's not what people often want to do. At least people who are not already political junkies and people who might not want to watch that again and again. So how do you do something that is fun, like playing soccer, but easier to scale? And that's not just scalable and fun, but actually effective, unlike, your uncle tweeting rage at people and not necessarily getting any positive results. So what's in the middle here, or one way to put it is, what's the opposite of highly engaging divisive content? What's something that can spread trust and respect on a large scale? And of course, my tentative hopeful answer to this is a game called Tango. But first, I want to thank the people who are really making this go. So Lucas Woodley is an amazing grad student who is running Tango research now. This began with work by Evan DeFilippis, who now works for Mr. Beast, very much at scale. And then Shankar Ravi has been really important on our tech and production side. Okay, so I figured rather than describing in great detail the game, I give you a chance to play it. So we'll see if we can pack this into our 20 minutes. And here's what we'll need to do. So I I'm gonna you can use the QR code, but I think it probably would make more sense if you're on a computer to just use the link, which I just put in the chat. Oh wait, I just sent the chat to one person who I was chatting with. How do I send this to everyone? Sorry. To, where's everyone? Come on. Oh, meeting group chat. All right, here we go. Does everyone just get the link? Yeah, okay, good. So, hop on. What it's going to do is it's going to ask you a few questions about yourself, and then you'll get paired up with somebody, and you'll have a chance to chat with them, get to know each other, pick a team name, and then once the timer runs out on the chat, you hop into the quiz questions. And the basic story there is that you need to answer these quiz questions together. That is, you both, in order to get your points, you both have to submit the correct answer. So, and if you submit different answers, even if one of you is right, then nobody gets any points. So you got to work together to find the right things. Um, all right. So I'm guessing that'll take about 10 minutes all told. And I'll sort of check in. If people are done, you can just say done in the chat, and that'll give me a sense for like when people are starting to finish up. So have fun, and I'll see you on the other side. All right, I'm starting to see more people finish up, but we'll give it a few more minutes just to give me a sense. Do please just say done in the chat when you're done so that we have a sense. Yeah, you can also put your team names in the chat, and then you can verify who your partner is if you like. I see Slither in there. All right, loving the names. Roasted tomatoes are good. What was that? I like the flying chess maniacs. Excellent. Fierce eagles, invisible geniuses. All right, good stuff. Okay, so I'm gonna move ahead, but if you're still playing with your partner, feel free to keep going. Um, and I'll tell you a little bit about the results. So, you are obviously not a representative sample, politically and culturally or otherwise, but I hope you found some interesting engagement there. After many years of running RCTs with this, we published our paper this summer. This is focused on Republicans and Democrats playing online. So you can see this is from these data from experiment 5, and you can see how we're connecting Republicans and Democrats across the United States. And the headline results that when people play this game with someone who's politically different from them, which may or may not have happened to you, we see a significant decrease in animosity towards the whole out party, as measured by the sort of classic feeling thermometer. The immediate decrease on average or increase on average in warmth is 9 degrees, which is the equivalent of rolling back 15 years of increased animosity. Now, of course, that doesn't last. It fades over time, but these results are surprisingly durable. With feeling thermometer, we see in some experiments the effects lasting a month, and in some cases, we see it lasting 4 months. And in fact, usually lasts 4 months from playing the game once. This would be like a 45-minute game instead of the 10-minute game that you had. Similar results with economic giving, dividing $100 between a random out party member and a random in party member. And 4 months later, people are still more likely to split $100 evenly between a Republican and a Democrat if they've played tango. We also see effects on more directly democratic things like acknowledgement that the out party can make valid points or valid arguments and support for political compromise, and those last at least a week and likely a bit more. Um, and we get lots of nice comments from people saying that they really enjoyed it. In our online experiments, the median enjoyment rating was 10 out of 10. Now, granted, these people are not necessarily expecting to have a great time, so this was sort of a boost for them. But we are finding that even in more realistic settings, people really enjoy the game a lot. And you can see some nice comments here from Republicans in red and Democrats in blue. And the thing that really seems to make it go is mutual respect. That our key outcome effects are moderated by whether or not people say, my partner respected me and I respected my partner. We both had useful things to contribute. Something I'm often asked is, why care about people's feelings? Okay, it's nice if you can make people feel a little bit more warmly towards people they disagree with, but what we're really dealing with here is a problem of, undermining democracy and looming political violence, and in some cases not looming, it's already happened. The way I think about it is that the violent political storms don't happen in isolation. They feed off of a vast sea of everyday fear and resentment. And there's a lot of research suggesting that, in places where you have deep or widespread, I should say, affective polarization, you're more likely to see the pillars of democracy buckling and seeing violence breaking out in ways small and sometimes not so small. So I think this is, making people feel less animosity towards the other side that have real powerful political consequences, although it's hard to do controlled experiments with things like political violence. Moving out into the field, and this is with a big thanks to John Doris. Our first real field test of this was at the Cornell Dyson School, where John teaches, and this was led by his colleague Trent Presler in the classroom. We had Cornell students do a customized version of this game, and we found that when people played with someone different from them, especially, we see an increase in their acknowledgement that the out party can, or the other, or someone with a different political ideology can make valid points. Across the board, we see more interest in getting to know, in this case, Cornell students whose views are different. And the median enjoyment of the game was 9 out of 10 here, and the modal enjoyment was 10 out of 10. So the Cornellians really like this, and most people shared their contact info to meet their to meet their partners, which we were really excited about. So since then, we've been running Tango games at lots of other places, and we see the same results everywhere. That is, more openness to the other out parties or other ideologies' ideas, increased interest in getting to know people who are different, primarily if you're paired with someone different, and very high enjoyment ratings. So things are going great that way. And we had our biggest Tango game yet here at Harvard, the incoming freshman class of 2029. So over 1,000 students played Tango. This is about a quarter of the class in one of the 4 sessions where we ran this here. And we saw significant effects on all of our key outcome measures. So acknowledgement that the other side can make valid points, interested in getting to know people, and then feelings towards the other side, and more comfort voicing controversial opinions. And this was one that I think was particularly important given what's going on at Harvard. When liberals played with conservative partners, they felt about 7 degrees warmer towards the opposition. So that's like more than 10 years of reduced animosity rolled or increased animosity rolled back. And then conservatives on campus, who are outnumbered about 4-1, felt like 5 points more comfortable voicing controversial opinions on campus, which I think is really important for the health of our environment here. We had a great discussion after. So these are some of the students participating in a post game discussion. Maybe we'll have time for a little bit of one. We motivated this with Red Sox tickets using carrots rather than sticks, and I think that really got people engaged. 93% of students at Harvard said that they had a positive view of the game. 80% gave their contact info, and more than 10%, over 100 students, met up with their Tango partners the following week in the dining hall, and we got lots of great comments from people. So really excited about rolling this out in higher ed. We are looking to get this into other countries. So between Arabs and Jews within Israel, Hindus and Muslims in India, between Catholic and Protestant neighborhoods and sort of cultures and religions in Northern Ireland, we are looking to get this out online in the wild with a little bit of an AI assist to help connect people better in real time. AI for the workplace, and maybe even a game show. We'll see if that materializes. But the thing that's most relevant for you is if you would like to run a Tango game at your school, especially if you can connect with deans who could get this into orientation or residential life programming or into things in dining halls and stuff like that. We'd love to hear from you. So please reach out either to me or to Therese Smith, who's at our incubation partner, the Global Development Incubator. We'd love to hear from you. And this is more of the team that's working on this, our advisors on the bottom row and the GDI team, the original GDI team there. And I will, and then some of our funders. So I will leave it at that, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts with the time that we have for questions. So thanks. Hope you enjoyed the game.
Thanks, Josh. Give me 1 sec to get myself pinned, change the view so we're in gallery so we can see everybody. Okay, So, Joanna, you're at the top of our Q&A list.
Hi, go ahead.
Uh, Hi, thanks so much. That's so exciting. That was so much fun. Thanks for the presentation. I was wondering whether, so it's really cool that you get this post-test effect where you get higher endorsement of the claim that people in the other group can make valid points. Can you get them to extend that to saying they make valid points about politics or about political issues?
I'm assuming that people are interpreting it that way. Like the agree disagree is conservatives and liberals both make valid points. I'm guessing this is not people, saying things like pizza is tasty. Yes, good point. But I hadn't interpreted it that way. But we could be more precise to confirm that that's what people have in mind. Yeah, but it tracks with things like, do you want to meet people who are politically different from you, which suggests that it's related to political disagreement and not just an acknowledgement that there can be common ground outside of politics. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay,
Should I just,
Xiao Tong. Yeah,
yeah.
Xiao Tong. Oh, we can't unmute. Oh, sorry. Good. Yes, that's correct. That finally, I said I would turn it back on. I would make you able to unmute yourselves during the Q&A, and I dropped the ball on that. Now you can unmute yourself. Try it again. Sorry.
Okay, hi. Finally, my voice can go through, but I still not allowed to open my video, but it's fine. So, my question is, if you can give me access about turn my video so
Yep.
guys can
There we
see
go.
me. Okay.
Perfect.
Hi. Okay. Yay. Thank you for the presentation, and I find the game is very interesting. I just wondering about the effect of the exposure, for example. I find it's interesting to like just make an online experiment and combine people with different ideas or different political ideology. But how long you think is an appropriate time to let them um, interact with each other to make sure your experiment has strong enough effect to change their beliefs about a different party, for example, the cold feelings or warm feelings of the people who has different political ideology with me. For example, I want to like show them video as the stimuli, but I'm not sure like will that be strong enough. But I'm sure like your game design is very strong because you did see people change their attitudes and their feelings. So how do you think about that? The the stimuli format or the length of the stimuli?
So I
Thank
just want
you.
to make sure, is the question like, would it be more effective if people were face to face on video? Is that the question?
No, I think my question is, what's how long the stimuli or like how long people exposed to the study to the experiment with each other will make the result effective, will make it
Right.
okay, they
Yeah.
do change their feelings.
Yeah. So we
The
see
time.
positive effects with short games that are like 15 minutes long. A 45-minute game has longer and more lasting effects. The good news is that in a recent study we haven't published yet, we find that the effects can be cumulative. So we have people play 3 short games once a week for 3 weeks, and the effect at week 3 and partly at week 2 is bigger than the effect after week 1. So I think, as we're sort of looking to roll this out in the real world, the hope is that people can, it has a big enough effect that you and it's repeatable enough that you can have a kind of sustained impact. Like if people played,
Mm.
every 2 or 3 months or once a month or something like that, the hope would be that would really make a difference in terms of people's more durable attitudes. But we haven't had a chance to do that kind of long-term repetition.
I see. So if it repeatedly make your participant exposed to the stimuli you designed, it may work or it may have stronger effect, right?
Thomas, are we are we at time, or do we have time for one more? What do you want to do?
I think it would be best just because of time restrictions if we went on to see get more questions. Is that if that's okay? I'm sorry. I hope that's okay.
Shut up.
All
There's
good.
a question and it's
Oh, Jillian, you had your hand up, so you were the next person in queue, yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Jillian Lee Meyer. I'm a dual doctoral student at Indiana University Bloomington. I study social psychology and cognitive science, specifically moral psychology. I'm a really big fan, so this is the first time I've ever gotten to see you talk, and it was really great. You're about like the extent of moral neuroscience that I can do. I'm like, this is palatable, but further than that. But I'm currently working on a descriptive measure of morality that's supposed to be really interdisciplinary and representative of different values, to then be situated in a narrative structure where people can kind of play this game, a gamified task, to at the end find out what kind of values that they use when they made moral decisions, to be used in stuff like ethics institute workshops or depolarization things for civic groups. So I've been doing a lot of research into what makes things engaging for people, especially outside of academia, to use to learn. But then also, like, there's research out there that this kind of stuff, engagement, doesn't lead to better learning or critical thinking skills. And then you've got other sets of research that show, yes, like these specific civic engagement programs did show results, or like being a philosophy major makes you better at critical thinking, the research on that. Like, what is the difference between these kind of interventions that work and we see positive effects of versus the ones that aren't as effective?
That's a big question, and I'm probably not the most qualified person to answer it. I think probably where I'll sort of play close to what I know, which is just to say, remind you of why I think Tango works, is I think it's psychologically the mutual respect seems to be the number one thing, and I think that comes from getting competence signals, but also signals of warmth or acceptance or trust from the other person, and people are more comfortable saying, yeah, you're okay when they feel accepted and trusted and respected by the other person. So I think it's that mutuality with an emphasis on respect, which has, I think, both a sort of warmth dimension and a competence dimension. That's kind of my hunch of what the key thing is psychologically. I think the things that work best tend to have some version of those principles at work. If there are things that work that don't, I don't know what they are, but they may be out there. Yeah.
Okay. Renato, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. I am a PhD student at the University of Milan. It was very nice presentation. I will be very quick because I think we are running out of time. Also, here in Italy, it's very late. And my question is, do you think, because the sensation I had while playing the game was that the fact that it was a game was part of its success, because I have interactions with political like opinions and stuff, and often they lead to wrong conclusions and like to more animosity than before. And maybe the same the idea that this is a game, like we have to pursue something together, is part of it. Do you agree with that? And if you can elaborate on game, on the concept.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then the question is, what really, what are the essential features of a game, right? They're things where there's something that's challenging but doable. You get sort of immediate feedback on how you're doing towards a goal, right? And I think that having it be sort of rewarding and engaging in that sort of near-term way, and where the other person is kind of part of your rewarding experience. Oh, you knew something I didn't know, and now we're doing better, and you appreciated what I knew, and now we're doing better. It's that mutual reward, It's like picking bugs out of each other's fur if you're a chimp. What could be better, right? That I think is what really does it. And then I think specifically with this, I think as compared to dialogue things, the fact that it's fact based, right? That when something is like, well, what's your opinion? Well, what do you think about immigration or guns or whatever? People, either they're afraid or they're the opposite of afraid, and they want to sort of bowl people over with their prepared talking points. Focusing it on the facts, I think, where everybody has to sort of be a little surprised and gets to bend a little bit, but not too much. They don't have to change their minds about the issue. They just have to acknowledge, like, okay, well, you've got a point about guns there or immigration there. I think that's part of what enables people to bend without breaking and to see that in a kind of mutual way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for coming in on the late night. I appreciate it.
So I think Walter has a question. Let's do Walter. And there might be, if we have time, there might be a comment in the chat by Tamar. Yeah,
All
Walter.
right. Hey, Walter.
Hey Josh, how's it going?
I'm
Uh,
good.
Good to hear this is working so well. My question is really, does it work as well for the extreme conservatives and the extreme liberals as it does for people closer to the middle?
Yeah. So what we find with the online groups is that we see the same net effect for people who describe themselves as strong partisans versus moderate or weak partisans. They don't end up in the same place. So if you have like, 5 out of 100 warmth for Democrats, you might move up to 15, whereas someone else who's like at 40 might move up to 50. But the amount of movement is about the same from wherever people are starting. Now there's really extreme, like, and we would love to try this with people whose views are really extreme, but we have not had that chance, or at least we haven't had enough of them for that we could sort of put them in a
What,
separate
Harvard
group and
doesn't
test
let
the
in
effects
those
for them. But
students?
that's a great question. Yeah. I think actually, so Harvard, yeah, Harvard is like 20% will identify as some kind of conservative. It's mostly center right, and you get like a few strong conservatives, but I don't know how extreme you have in mind. But yeah, the people who would come close to extreme, we're talking about a pretty small proportion of the population, and yeah, Cambridge might not be the most inviting place for them.
Thanks.
All right. Well, that gets us right at about the 10-minute mark. I had a question, but I can send it to Josh on the side. And partly it relates to how to get something like this here on the campus at College of Charleston. So thanks a lot, Josh. That was amazing. I appreciate it. Thanks for the talk, and I hope it continues to move forward in ways that help society. All right.
Thank you so
Let
much,
me.
and please do reach out if you want to do it at your school. Go ahead. Yeah.
Great. All right. So give me one sec. I'm going to Walter. Let me pin. There we go. Unpin myself. Gonna pin and unpin people. Okay, Walter, if you want to go ahead and introduce Meldon, that would be great.
The tendency when you introduce people is to say really nice things about them. But I've got this chip on my shoulder about Melton. Like, she left Duke. Like, what the hell's going on with that? We miss you so much down here. We wish you were still here. Uh, but anyway, she has moved on, and so please come back. But in lieu of coming back, I look forward to hearing your talk. Melton is known for her work. I mean, I remember talking about gossip and all kinds of topics with her. She's interested in everything. But I think one thing that most people should know is that she runs a lot of groups to help people get into moral psychology from all around the world. And I don't want to steal any of your thunder. You might mention them in your talk, so I'll just let you get going. So we'll have plenty of time to hear from you. Thank you so much for talking to MPRG.
Well, thank you so much, Walter. And I miss Duke and Durham very much. So I won't go too into it so that, like I said in the chat, I don't want to start crying before the talk. Usually that doesn't end well for the listeners. I let the emotions out. All right. So I'm really honored. I'm assuming everybody can see my screen. Just double checking. Perfect.
Yeah, looks
I'm
great.
really honored to be here this afternoon among such a fantastic lineup. And I want to thank Thomas and the organizer of today's gathering, as well as the broader moral psychology research group for creating this community. And today I'll be presenting on children's application of religious norms across cultures. Humans are unique compared to other species in that they'll engage in aggression not only for preservation of territory or mating partners, but also for their system of beliefs. Across cultures, people adhere to and punish those who transgress a complex system of norms or shared expectations meant to guide their behavior. A puzzle in norm psychology is how individuals beginning in early childhood come to distinguish between norms that are group-specific and thus permissible for outgroups to violate versus those that apply more broadly and whose transgressions are condemnable regardless of group membership. This puzzle is especially salient in the case of religious norms. These are norms that are shaped by religious traditions, which prescribe practices ranging from dietary restrictions and dress codes to moral imperatives concerning harm and justice. For example, in some societies, norms about religious dress code are codified into laws, further blurring the line between group-specific and universal norms. Some scholars have suggested that religious individuals do not always differentiate religion from morality. This raises the possibility that the differentiation between religious norms and other kinds of norms, and whether or not they all apply to specific group members, may not be universal or present from early in life. Although some of these norms should apply only to members of one's religious group, other norms could be seen as universal. For instance, it's wrong for everyone to steal, regardless of religious affiliation. So understanding how individuals come to distinguish between norms that are group-specific versus those that apply broadly is crucial for explaining intergroup cooperation and conflict. In many societies, tensions arise when individuals expect universal adherence to their religious norms, positioning religion as a key factor in intractable and deadly conflicts. Insights from this work can allow us to trace the developmental roots of children's social judgments, particularly in how they respond to others who break rules, especially when those others belong to different social, cultural, or identity groups. So developmental research suggests that even young children are sensitive to different types of and their scope. By age 3, children distinguish between moral norms, rules that prohibit harm or injustice, and conventional norms, rules that regulate social practices. Children also judge violations of moral norms as less permissible and more severe than violations of conventional norms. Unlike moral or conventional norms, religious norms pertain to mandates from religious authorities, such as gods, their human representatives, or sacred texts. So before I go into this work, I want to clarify that in this work, in today's talk, we define religious norm violations as violations of rules explicitly laid out by a religious authority that are different from religious norms that are moral in their nature, such as rules against killing or stealing. And we borrow this definition from past research and theorizing. For instance, Srinivasan and colleagues' work, they call these they say that these lack intrinsic consequences for others' welfare and rights. So what we consider to be religious norms for this study involved rules around prayer, dress codes, dietary restrictions, to name a few. So now that we're all sharing a common ground on what I mean when I say religious norms, we can ask, how did they develop? In past work from US and India, this past work shows that older children, adolescents, and adults distinguish moral norms from religious norms and apply religious norms selectively to members of a particular religion. For instance, in a 2019 study, Srinivasan and colleagues tested 9 to 15-year-old Hindu and Muslim children in India, and they found that children reported that both Hindus and Muslims should not harm others, a moral norm, but only judged Hindus' violations of Hindu norms and not Muslim norms to be wrong. In another study, Srinivasan and Dahl once again interviewed 9 to 14-year-old Hindu and Muslim children in India, and they found that children distinguish between moral, conventional, and religious norms in terms of who made the norm, claiming that conventional norms are made by secular authorities, moral norms are made by no one, and religious norms are made by God or other religious authorities. And kids in this study also view these norms as differing in their utility. However, much of this work is mostly with children over the age of 9, so we don't know much about how children's religious norm understanding develops earlier in life, and how religious group membership affects children's expectations of who moral, conventional, and religious norms apply to. So for this study, we're interested in how children across different cultures and ages apply religious norms compared to moral and conventional norms. I feel very lucky to be part of the International Developing Belief Network, which spans 16 countries and 40 cultural and religious groups seeking to map the psychology of religious development from social and cognitive perspectives. Data presented today were collected by a group of 50 researchers from 13 research teams as part of this developing belief network. And again, the results from today's presentation come from extensive interviews designed and implemented by the entirety of this network. So this is a 3-wave long longitudinal study, and the data collection for the first wave has wrapped up, but we're still processing the data. So today I'm going to present preliminary data from 1,423 children between the ages of 4 and 12 years. Participants in today's sample are from 12 countries: China, Greece, India, Indonesia, Israel, Northern Ireland, Peru, Republic of Ireland, Singapore, South Africa, Uganda, and the US. Spanning 26 cultural and religious groups, representing 6 religions and belief systems: Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, and those who are religiously unaffiliated. This study was made up of 3 parts. We had a child survey as well as parent surveys, but for the sake of time, I'll be only focusing on the child survey. And kids got a battery of tasks. Again, today we're focusing on the norm violations task, but if any of you are curious, the full study protocol for Wave 1 and also for Wave 2 has been published at +1, if anybody would like to check it out. So in the norm violations tasks, we presented children with 4 norm violation blocks. These concerned a moral norm violation block about hitting others, a conventional violation block about wearing socks on your hands, and 2 religious norm violations. Moral and conventional norms were standard across our sites and religions. However, because religious norms are specific to the location and religion, we varied these norms for each site. So for example, depending on the site, these religious norms concerned a variety of religious practices, such as praying before eating, fasting before Easter, women wearing bindis, not eating meat, eating halal meat, going to the temple to pray, attending Mass every Sunday, and so on. So right about now, you might be thinking that these religious norms vary quite a bit, and in some sense they do. But as a developing belief network, we went through a thorough process for choosing these religious norms that are not inherently moral. And we identified religious norms that are appropriate for each site and religion. And I'm happy to talk about this process in more detail during the Q&A session. So for each specific norm, children heard a vignette about a religious in-group member and a religious out-group member breaking this norm. For instance, Singaporean Buddhist children, the religious in-group member was labeled as a Buddhist, and the religious out-group member was labeled as not Buddhist. For our Singaporean Muslim kids, the religious in-group member was a Muslim, and the religious out-group member was labeled as not Muslim. So notice here that we explicitly label our religious in-group, but define the out-group as a person who's not a member of the child's religion. In other words, when we define the out-group member, we define them in a non-specific way, such that children's own cultural expectations and biases about who that person is would fill in that information. Then, in a fixed order, children were asked about the permissibility and severity of these norm violations committed by a religious in-group member and a religious out-group member. For example, Muslim children in Singapore heard the following religious norm violation by another Muslim. This is a man named Hafiz. Hafiz is Muslim. Hafiz prays to someone other than Allah. Then children were asked to rate the permissibility of this action. Is that okay or not okay? And based on their responses to the permissibility question, they were asked a severity question: how good or how bad it was for that protagonist to pray to someone other than Allah. So here I want to note that we also asked children about the alterability of these norms for the religious in-group member, but I'll skip these in the interest of time. Then children also heard the same religious norm violation, this time committed by a religious out-group member. This is a man named Aming. Aming is not Muslim. Aming prays to someone other than Allah. Once again, children were asked to rate the permissibility and severity of this action. So for today's talk, like I said, I'll be focusing on children's permissibility and severity judgments. To test permissibility, we used a binary mixed effects logistic regression. And to test severity, we used a linear mixed effects model. Both models included norm type, protagonist identity, and age as predictors, as well as random intercepts for participant ID nested within country. We identified a three-way interaction among norm type, protagonist identity, and age in children's permissibility and severity judgments. So to unpack this interaction, I'll present our results using graphs because three-way interactions are notoriously ugly to look at. So first, let's parse out our three-way interaction for permissibility. Let me orient you to our graph. So here, our x-axis is children's age in years, y-axis is their average permissibility responses, split by norm type, religious, moral, and conventional norms. And the data points in lines represented in red are for the religious in-group, and blue or green is for the religious out-group. So one thing we would expect to see in our data is the moral conventional difference in children's permissibility judgments, with moral violations rated to be less permissible than conventional violations. And as expected, regardless of the identity of the transgressor, children evaluated the moral violation as impermissible, and much more so than the conventional violations. What about religious norms? If children expect everyone to know and follow their religious norms, they should judge both the in-group and the out-group members' actions to be similarly impermissible. But if children accept that others can have different religious norms than them, they should judge religious norm violations by out-group members to be more permissible than in-group members. And indeed, children judged religious norm violations committed by an out-group member to be increasingly more permissible, while those committed by in-group members were seen as less permissible. What about their severity judgments? So remember that we also found this three-way interaction for severity. So let's parse this out. Similar to permissibility, children evaluated moral violations to be very bad. And once again, we see this moral conventional distinction, with children evaluating moral violations as more severe than conventional violations. What about religious norms? With age, children judged religious norm violations committed by out-group members to be increasingly less severe and actually good, while religious norm violations committed by in-group members were seen as more severe. So across a sample of hundreds of children from 12 countries, 26 cultural and religious groups, and 6 religions, we see that with age, children believe that non-moral religious practices, or religious norms, as I've been referring to in this talk, apply more to the religious in-group than the out-group. And so far I've shown you our broader findings, but of course there are a variety of ways in which we can further investigate this data. So I'm going to show you just one of them. So here is children's severity judgments of only the out-group members split by religion. So one thing you might notice here is that while there's some variation, and again, this is our preliminary results, I would like to highlight that again, but while there's some variation across religious groups in how they respond to a norm violation by an out-group member, they all tend to follow a similar pattern. And this consistency is compelling, and the variation appears to have meaningful roots. And we believe that it can be explained by factors such as socialization practices, the child's own religious identity, or their exposure to religious diversity within their community. These early influences may play a key role in shaping how children make sense of difference, potentially planting the seeds of either tolerance or intolerance. And we're currently in the process of analyzing the full data set from all our remaining sites. And once complete, we'll be able to provide a richer, more comprehensive picture of how these dynamics play out across diverse cultural and religious settings. So this line of research can offer a window into the early development of tolerance across group boundaries. So today I showed you that regardless of religion, children in our study judged religious norm violations committed by an out-group member to be increasingly more permissible and less severe. In contrast, those committed by in-group members were seen as less permissible and more severe. We're really excited to incorporate the remaining countries and samples into our analyses, and we expect to reach over 1,800 kids in our final sample. So stay tuned for this as well. So I want to start by acknowledging the massive effort from the whole team at DBN, including my collaborators and co-authors on the specific project who are pictured on this slide. It has taken this has been a massive effort, taking the last 5 years of our lives to get this project off the ground in its current shape. And while I have you all moral psychology and philosophy enthusiasts here, I want to note that I just launched the Moral Minds Lab at Michigan State University, and we have a brand new lab equipped for child and adult testing, and I've already established partnerships with local children's museums and other organizations that will allow us to collect data at their sites. This fall, I'll be looking for PhD students in this next admission cycle, so if norms or moral psychology work excites you, or you know someone who might be interested, I would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, hold on one sec. Let me get everything moved around here. I changed the screen, so see what's going on. Sorry, guys, the participant list is very long. It takes me a second to get around everything. Nope, that's not what I want. Okay. Yes. So questions. Are people muted? Oh, I gotta make it possible people mute themselves. Hold on. Joanna, go ahead.
Thanks so much. This is, yeah, really fascinating work. I'm sure you covered this. I was just trying to process a lot of really cool information at the same time. How in your data do you think that children are thinking about religious norms as compared to non-religious conventional norms?
Yeah, so we asked them a non-religious conventional norm, which is wearing socks on your hands. We wanted to make sure that we're asking the same moral and conventional items across our site. So that involved a lot of conversations to find examples that would work across a variety of our sites. So some of our sites include Yucatan Mayan kids. So we want to make sure that the conventional norms we pick would be applicable for them as well. Um, and when we ask children about these conventional norm violations committed by an in-group or an out-group member, they still think that these violations are not okay, but they're not distinguishing it across the group identity. So they're not necessarily expecting religious in-group or out-group members to respond drastically differently to or behave drastically differently compared to their expectations or their judgments from the religious in-group and out-group members violating religious norms.
Thanks, Melton. Can I ask a question? Yeah, this is really interesting stuff. I like this update on sort of the old tutorial.
Oh,
Well, my question is, do you have a sense of what the mechanism might be?
we think it might have something to do with socialization practices. So we're currently in the process of, I'm hoping that you didn't get cut off, but if,
No,
okay, perfect. So we think it might have something to do with socialization. So we're interested in looking at parents' own reports of religiosity, their familiarity with children's familiarity with their own religious norms. So when I was going over the broader methods, we also had other tasks that focused on children's knowledge of different religious deities, their physical and their property attributions of these. So, for instance, asking questions if they're Christian, asking about is can God feel sadness? Can Jesus feel sadness? Can God pass through walls? Can Jesus pass through walls? So we have questions about their knowledge of their religion. We have questions about how much they practice or their sources of religious information. So we think or at least we're planning to check if those could help explain degree to which children expect in-group members or out-group members to um, follow or not follow their religious norms. Maybe they can be explained away by what they see. And the other thing is looking at the religious diversity in their locations. So maybe contact
Thanks.
with.
Huge study.
Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you. Walter, I think you might be next.
Okay, if nobody else is, I don't want to jump in front of anybody because. So, my question, Melton, is what it means to be a Hindu. So Hindus have to, uh, you know, follow the norms according the norms of Hinduism.
Huge study.
But some people say they're Hindu. All they mean is I'm part of that ethnic group. They don't mean I really believe any of that stuff. And I wonder whether people's attitudes might be different in that case. A Hindu who really, follows the religion versus somebody who is born into that group. The same for Jewish. I have friends who say, yeah, I'm Jewish. I don't believe any of that stuff. I don't keep kosher. I don't do any of it. And I wonder whether people, maybe kids even, would view violations differently depending on whether you're really committed to the religion as opposed to simply part of that culture from upbringing.
I think there's a way to get at that question within our data set that we're planning to include in our analyses or our exploratory analyses, and that is degree of religiosity and religious familiarity and religious practices. So if we are presumably people who are really religious, follow that, and it's not just their identity on their ID card or anything like that, but it's something they do day in and day out. That those people will have higher reports of their religiosity or religious practices. So if we ask them questions about how often do you do X with your child, parents might report this. So we're looking at parent reports of this, as well as children's own familiarity with their own religion. Because if they're embedded in religious schools, embedded in religious practices, presumably they would be more familiar with their religion. So being able to account for that and seeing, does that explain away some of this variability in children's responses?
So I just want to emphasize, I was talking about the religiosity of the person in the scenario who did the
Oh, I see.
violation, not the
So,
religiosity of the participant who's answering the question.
so in that case, so one of the questions that we really wanted to ask as part of the follow-up waves of this study was this, like, if you violate a religious norm, if you pray to someone other than Allah, would Allah be mad at you, or would God be mad at you if you violate this rule? Um, is that punishable? Would that be something that angers? Are you still a Muslim? So we thought about adding those questions to really get at that. And then some of our colleagues, also who are co-authors on this paper, brought up the fact that not all religions and not all religious deities punish. So if we bring these follow-up punishment related questions, we're actually teaching something to children that's not in their religion, or it's not a part of their environment and would be harmful for them. So because of that, we ended up not asking that question, but we really thought about and debated quite a lot, and would have been nice to see, but again, we want to be very respectful of the cultures we're working with, and we don't want to bring anything bad to them. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, now Diego, perfect. On cue.
Wonderful. Amazing work, Meltem. Love it. Great talk. My questions are very similar to some of the ones that came up about socialization and the parents, so that was great. You got to that. But I guess the other thing I was thinking about was this identification piece, and I was wondering if you think about religious identities or norms as like distinct from other kinds of group identities or norms. Like I was thinking of, because it's sort of this effect of like, well, my in-group can do that, or my in-group can't do that because we know that that's not how we do things in our crew. But like people elsewhere who have different religious norms, like as I get older, I start to discover, and there can be some variability there. So I was trying to think about, people who like different hometowns, different school norms, different, partisan norms, like all the different identities that people might have. And that's like, well, in our school, you're allowed to walk on this side of the hall, but we know that like that's only so if you broke that rule, that would be not okay. But I know that people in other schools do it differently. So I was thinking about just those different types of norms. And if you think of the religious norms as like a sort of special or distinct category, or if it's under this kind of broader umbrella of like group identities that people develop. So I was wondering how you think about it.
Yeah, I think it is distinct in the sense that there's for the most part, for believers, a non-human component of the rule. So if I'm thinking of, I think Mahesh Srinivasan and Auden Dahl has this paper published 2024 where they asked about who made the rules, where kids are distinguishing between these different features of these norms, saying that religious norms are made by religious authorities like God, or I believe they're human counterparts, religious counterparts, whereas conventional norms are made by secular authorities in that country. So even kids think around that stays with 9 to 14-year-olds, they start distinguishing these different kinds. They think that they serve different functions, all of these three separate norms. So they definitely are treating these differently. Are they treating these differently than um, like national norms, maybe? It's not necessarily moralized in the same sense, but in some of our work with Tamar Krishna, who's on in this audience as well, some of my postdoc work, we looked at how children think about and expect immigrants to behave. So because they come with different sets of norms, do they expect them to adapt to the norms of their new land? And we see that children expect some degree of conformity. So they are very much norm-minded, and they follow and enforce their norms. And religious norms have this extra specialty to it that makes it even more important in some sense, and on par with some of the more moral norms, probably.
Awesome. Thanks.
Oh, Thomas, I think you're
Thomas, I think
talking, but
you're
you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say that I was thanking you very much for an interesting talk. Thanks for the questions. I think I will. It's gonna take me a second to rearrange things again. I got to set up John to introduce everything that's coming next. So we'll do that. But thanks again, Milton. That was great. I appreciate it.
Thomas, should we take a 15-minute break? I mean, a 5-minute break?
Yes, that gives me more time. That'd be even better.
Good, let's do that.
Perfect. We'll see everybody back in a minute. Real quick, how are you, Paul? This is Thomas. I was just wanting to say
I
hi
am
real
great.
quick.
How you doing? Good to be
Thanks for
here.
agreeing to do this.
No, this is quite an audience, man.
Yeah, I'm very
You know,
excited. We're very
all of
happy.
the all-stars of moral psychology and moral philosophy are terrifying.
Oh man, it's such a fun crew. It's been great spending my career working with this kind of group of people, this sort of interdisciplinary crowd. So we're obviously very happy to have you tonight.
It's a
So thanks.
it's a great community. So let's see. Do I have sharing privileges? Should I
You
once
do indeed. You're already a
John
co-host.
introduces me?
John's going to introduce you
I'm a
and say a little bit about
co-host.
the award here in a minute, and then you'll be
Okay,
able
and
to share your screen.
then I'll share my screen and hop on.
Yep.
Um,
If you want to share your slides real quick just to make sure they work while we're taking the break, we can do that.
That is a great idea. Let's see. So I go share, hit it. Let's see. Do I share sound? Optimize for video. And how are we doing with that?
Yep, perfect.
Let's see. There's a way to put myself up here. And oops. And yeah. So here's how it'll go.
Yep.
There you go. There's like a million of them, but I go fast.
There we go.
Okay.
Just
Let me see. Stop share.
yep, perfect. Hmm. For some reason I can't. Can you still hear me, John? Oh,
Yes.
okay. It's good because for some reason my video is not working anymore, so that's perfect timing. Couldn't have worked out any better. So I'll hand it off to you, and I'll have to unplug my camera and start it back up. You tell me
Okay, so
when
you
we can
want me
go
to
whenever we can
start?
go whenever we can go whenever you're ready. Yeah.
Okay. So it's my honor to introduce the address for the Stephen Stitch Award for Career Achievement in Moral Psychology. I don't want to linger too long on Steve CV, which is thick with accolades and achievements, including 20 books and over 200 papers. But I did want to flag one summary statistic. So Steve's published 200 papers, and there have been 100 reprints in 9 languages, which means that if Steve writes a paper, there's a 50% chance it gets reprinted, which is completely preposterous. Um, and it strikes me that one thing about this, of course, Steve is noted for taking positions that we can politely refer to as provocative, but I think the reason the papers get printed is because they're so constructive. And even for those people who don't, God forbid, favor Stitchian solutions, the papers help them to see what the real problem is and what it would take to solve it. But I think in the end, our gift to the world as academics aren't really to be measured in terms of papers, but people. And there's nobody in philosophy and cognitive science that's given more in this way than Steve. Profession is thick with his formal and informal mentees. And many of the leading figures in moral psychology now are students of Steve. And now their students are making their significant contributions and training their own students, meaning that the future of moral psychology is peopled with the academic grandchildren and great grandchildren of Steve Stitch. Years ago, when I was an assistant professor at Santa Cruz and kind of having a bad time, Steve came out to visit and he guest lectured in my class, which had the not entirely welcome result of my students saying for the rest of my time at Santa Cruz, "When's Stitch coming back?" Um, but after we went out for a drink and over a bourbon or two, Steve told me something I've not forgotten, which is, "I do this to help young people." Um, and so he has, and young people who have now no longer so young. And so we can thank Steve not only for his many important contributions to our field intellectually, but also for reminding us that you can do well by doing good. If you name an award for somebody like Steve, one problem is, how do you award it to someone who won't suffer embarrassingly by comparison? But fortunately, in this case, it turned out to be easy. The committee met, and someone immediately said, "What about Paul Bloom?" And everybody said, "Yep." Paul's the professor of psychology at University of Toronto and the Brooks and Suzanne Reagan Professor Emeritus of Psychology at Yale University. He became famous for his work on moral development, but his work ranges widely over moral psychology and the human experience more generally. His 7 books and many, many papers. Paul, you could help a brother out and number the papers on your CV. I had to give up. But they've been cited 50,000 times to the um, effect of an H index of 92. Um, Paul also seems like an especially good choice because not only is he, like Steve, remarkably bright and influential, but he has a provocatively independent cast of mind. So who better to honor someone who wrote a book arguing that beliefs don't exist with a lecture by someone who wrote a book arguing that empathy is kind of a downer. And more than that, Paul, like Steve, is a humble and public spirited person who turns up to help and contribute and help out when he's asked. And so what better person to offer to honor moral psychology's boss of all bosses, Steve Stitch, than Paul Bloom, who I think is going to tell us more about why morality is bad.
All right. Thanks for that introduction, John. Let me turn it over to Paul.
Thank you. Let me just shift this a bit. Can everybody hear me?
Yes,
Odd.
perfect.
Thank you, John, for a very gracious introduction. I'll disagree with one point. I actually am embarrassed and humbled by the comparison. And I just want to say how proud I am to get this award. And I am particularly honored to have it named after Steve Stitch, a person I very greatly admire. John, you did a great job of outlining Steve's accomplishments as a scholar and as a person. And I would just want to echo it. There's nobody I would rather have a name associated with mine. So this is really moving for me. I'll also warn you, my talk will bear little resemblance to my abstract. One of my favorite papers ever was written by the behaviorist Edward Thorndike in the 1930s. And Edward Thorndike was just this button-down guy, but the paper was very freewheeling and kind of fun. He was interested in the sorts of things that people like and don't like. And one way he used to explore this is by asking how much people would pay, how much you have to pay people to get certain experiences. How much would it have to pay you to chop off your big toe? How much would it have to pay you to spit on a picture of your mother? To give up belief in life after death. If you're a man, to walk down Fifth Avenue in the middle of the day without a hat, different times. To spend the rest of your life in a small room in Kansas, and the data are fascinating. Highly recommended paper. But 2 comparisons I want to talk about from the beginning, and I want people to play along in their own head. One of the questions that Thorndike asked was, how much would I have to pay you to pull out one of your front teeth with a pair of pliers? So here is the answer he got, the average answer he got. I think people come to their own conclusions. And this is translated into current contemporary US dollars, $74,000. Then he asked, as another question, how much would I have to pay you to kill a cat with your hands? The answer to that is $164,000. Now, again, your mileage may vary. Some people would say, I wouldn't do it for any money in the world. Some people would say, I do it for free. I pay you. But for the most part, I think these are the averages and these capture our intuitions. And this is a cool comparison because it suggests that it is much more aversive for us to harm a helpless animal than to suffer a disfiguring and agonizing procedure. And this suggests that we're nice. And this niceness was nicely summed up by Adam Smith in his wonderful book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, a book he himself said is better than Wealth of Nations. And Smith writes, however selfish soever man may be supposed, there are evidently some principles in his nature which interest him in the fortune of others and render their happiness necessary to him. That we often derive sorrow from the sorrow of others is a matter of fact too obvious to require any instances to prove it. Now, for a long time, this kindness was a mystery. And you could wonder, how does the amoral process of biological evolution, natural selection, give rise to animals who genuinely care about others and behave altruistically? Why isn't it like Tennyson said, nature red in tooth and claw? It's actually many mysteries, and I'm going to put this up over and over again in this talk, but this is a diagram of the moral circle, and you could ask, why does concern extend away from the self to kin, or to just beyond that to social group, or beyond that to one's nation, or beyond that to all people? It turns out that these main mysteries have been solved, and I think many people in the room could kind of say aloud with me what the solutions are. With regard to kin, part of the solution is that natural selection favors the proliferation of genes, and we share genes with close kin. My children have, on average, 50% of my genes. So, worked out by people like Hamilton with Hamilton's rule. If I could behave in ways that help my kin, this would benefit my genes. And so, whatever proclivities that one's kin are biologically built in will then extend to the next generation. Natural selection will make us kind to those that are close to us. As Richard Dawkins points out, this is kind of radical. You might think before Darwin that it's natural to be selfish. But Dawkins points out that from a genetic standpoint, there's no hard and fast distinction between oneself and another. And so the idea of selfishness, individual selfishness, is actually a biological anomaly where somewhat our concerns are naturally spread out to others. Then you get to social group and tribe, and there you have a different kind of story, which is how do you get around the problem of that you think that a selfish individual who took the benefits of any joint endeavor but didn't pay any costs would do better. You think nice guys would finish last. And the solution, which I'm going to talk a little bit about more in this presentation, was sketched out by Robert Trivers and involves reciprocal altruism, which is animals help others in expectation or the potential for them to be helped in the future. Then you get the rest of the extension of the moral circle, which seems to be not just biological, but largely cultural. And there are different theories of how this happens, and we'll talk a little bit more about that also later on in this talk. So now the question of why people are sort of kind has kind of been answered for the most part. Now there's another question, though. Why are people often unkind? Why do we often do bad things? And you might think that some of us are genetic mutants, who lack the evolved rudiments of kindness and compassion. And maybe some people exist. I don't think there are many of them, though. But regardless, why do the rest of us do bad things? And I want to work through in this talk 6 explanations, going through 3 of them quickly and lingering on 3 of them, basically as an excuse to talk about things which I find interesting, which I'm working on, which I'm struggling with, which I hope people in this room find interesting and be willing to comment on. And I'm going to include projects that are just starting off as a way to get feedback and maybe interest people in joining up on these. So one obvious answer to why we do bad things is instrumental goals. We want some things. In order to get some things, we often have to harm others. The great bank robber Willie Sutton was asked why he robbed banks, and he answered, because that's where the money is. A second explanation is loss of control. So in his wonderful book on evil, Roy Baumeister estimates that alcohol and drugs are involved in about half of violent crimes. Sometimes we want to do the good thing or we want to refrain from doing the bad thing, but we just lose control and we end up doing a bad thing. A third explanation is norms. This brings us back to the topic of Melton's excellent talk. And there's a lot to be said here, but the crude idea relevant here is that we learn norms for behavior, and often these norms dictate to what extent we'll do something good or to what extent we'll do something bad. For instance, studying college students, there's a large literature on the conditions leading to cheating and the conditions leading to binge drinking. While some of this work has proven to be non-replicable and there's some sort of scandals built around some of these studies, there's still a very large body of work suggesting that norms play a huge role in this kind of behavior. If you think everybody cheats, you're more likely to cheat. If you think nobody cheats, you're less likely to cheat, and so too for other behaviors. Now we're going to turn to some more complicated explanations. And one of them is dehumanization. So my favorite depiction of dehumanization is in this Black Mirror episode called Men Against Fire. And this was actually a very poorly rated Black Mirror episode, but I liked it. The setup in this episode is we meet a soldier, and he's going around, and he's apparently like part of a military group killing aliens, killing monsters. And these monsters have hideous faces, and they make these terrible shrieks. And we see him as like a brave freedom fighter, a brave defender of Earth, until we learn the twist is that he has an implant in his brain. And what this implant does is it takes normal people, and in fact, some sort of immigrant group, and turns them into monsters. And the logic is explained is in that way, soldiers could exterminate them. Soldiers are free of any inhibitions against killing them. The title of this is by a book by S.L.A. Marshall called Men Against Fire, The Problem of Battle Command. And the problem of battle command, according to Marshall, is it's hard to get people to kill other people. And one of the arguments about dehumanization is that this is how we do it. We see people as not people at all, and hence the normal moral prohibitions against treating them horribly don't apply. The philosopher Kelman writes, the inhibitions against murdering fellow human beings are generally so strong that the victims must be deprived of their human status if systematic killings to proceed in a smooth and orderly fashion. And I have no doubt, I'm going to be critical at some later point, but I have no doubt that dehumanization occurs at some time. In Europe and in Asia, quite a while ago, there were human zoos where people from Africa were displayed as if they were no different from any other animal in the zoo. Acts like the Holocaust plainly are accompanied by the perpetrators, to some extent, truly believing that they were dealing with individuals who are less than human. Now, these are extreme examples, but social psychologists have argued that dehumanization in kind of a milder form shows up in everyday life. So in this wonderful article by Haslam and Lohman, they write, outraged members of the public call sex offenders animals. The poor are mocked as libidinous dolts. Passersby look through homeless people as if they were transparent obstacles. Dementia sufferers are represented in media as shuffling zombies. Degrading pornographers depict women as mindless pneumatic objects. Exhausted doctors view their patients as inert bodies. And the claim is that all of these people, sex offenders, the poor, the homeless, and so on, are to some extent viewed as not fully human, as either animals or as objects. Psychologists have come up with all sorts of scales to measure dehumanization, building on some work by Gray and Wegner. Sometimes dehumanization is thought to be accompanied by denying agency to people. Sometimes it's thought to be denying second-order emotions to people. So everybody, one believes, can feel pain or pleasure, but second-order emotions like contempt and optimism are only present or only fully present in some of us. Some of us have less of it, and so aren't seen as fully human. In some lovely work, Nora Catelli and his colleagues have what they call a blatant dehumanization scale, where you have the famous ascent of man thing. And then you just ask people, how evolved do you think each of these individuals or groups are? You might imagine that people say, well, everybody's equally evolved, but they don't say that. When faced with Arabs, Russians, Muslims, and so on, they'll say these individuals are evolved to different extents. In one of their studies, they did a psychological profile where they used the blatant dehumanization scale with people who define themselves as being on the alt-right. And here are the results. And what you'll see is that white people, for them, are almost fully evolved. Americans in general, fully evolved. Men are pretty evolved. But then you go down, and this is the bottom end of the scale. Jews are fairly less evolved. Republicans who refuse to vote for Trump are less evolved than Jews. Feminists, not evolved at all, 57, you know. And Hillary Clinton is the least evolved of anything. A fifth force for bad behavior is status. So I mentioned instrumental goals: food, money, sex, love, security, and so on. But for social animals such as us, all of these are tied up with status and status desire. Um, in order to get these other instrumental values, people need to think well of you and think well of you relative to other people. The issue of a status desire, the importance we give to status, is something long observed. It seems to underlie what economists call positional goods. So, Robert Frank has pointed out that houses are to some extent positional goods in that houses obviously have sort of an absolute value in places you could live and so on. But houses have in America have grown and grown and grown in size. And the argument is that the value of a house isn't essentially in what you could do with it. It's actually in just that fact that it's the same size or bigger than the houses around you. Valuable artwork becomes valuable due to its scarcity. And along with the psychologist George Newman, I've done a lot of work suggesting that it's just true, maybe obvious, that the more scarce an artwork is, the more value people give to it. Advanced degrees, of which many in the room have, are valuable again, in part because of its scarcity and because it's an indicator of status. When you start looking for status, you see it everywhere. I gave a talk in Wales earlier this summer, and while I was in Wales, my son texted me and said, "Hey, Dad, what are you doing? What are you up to?" So I said, "I'm giving a talk," and so I texted him the poster of the talk. And he looks at it and he texts me right back and he says, "Dad, you're 17th." And in fact, I was 17th on the list. They had the list ordered them in some way, and that's where I was. Maybe better next year. Now, a status appetite, people sneer at it, but there's ways in which it could be a good thing. Um, it could be the force for great accomplishments of art and science, could be driven by a desire to excel and to be seen as excelling by others. Um, some philosophers and some psychologists argue that an appetite for status or related respect is the foundation for norms or intuitions of fairness. And that fairness is built out of each individual's desire to be treated as he or she deserves. But sometimes it's not a good thing at all. And there's all sorts of cases where our appetite for status leads to an appetite for domination, um, uh, and predation. So writing about Harvey Weinstein and various things he did to people who were under his power, Roxane Gay writes, there's a sexual component, yes. But mostly it's about someone exerting his or her will over another and deriving pleasure and satisfaction from that exertion. Now, I think status, I've made this argument, and other people have too. I think status is, in some way, an alternative, an opposing theory to dehumanization. And it might be that a lot of things that look like dehumanization actually are more the product of status and domination. So here's an example. David Livingston Smith has this wonderful book where he outlines a strong dehumanization claim. And he begins the book with some soldiers calling some other people dogs. Come on, dogs. And he says, that's dehumanization, to think of other people as dogs. But there's another analysis, which is that when a taunt like dogs, calling somebody a dog, isn't what you do if you actually think they're a dog. Um, I had a greyhound for many years. I never taunted it by calling it a dog. It is a dog. But rather, a taunt like dog, where you describe somebody as an animal, um, actually accepts the humanity of the other person and tries to degrade them by treating them as something that they're not. Uh, the philosopher Kate Mann puts this quite nicely. She describes this sort of thing as an insult that depends for its humiliating quality on its target's distinctively human desire to be recognized as human beings. When you call me a dog, you do that to hurt me. And you do that to hurt me because you know it would hurt me, because as a person, I don't want to be seen as a dog. I want to be seen as a person. Um, Other philosophers point out that the cruelty we do to one another is in some way incompatible with the claim that we see them as less than human. Um, if I see somebody as less than human, a group of people, I may well exterminate them or kill them to get them out of my way, but I wouldn't try to make them suffer. Um, Kwame Anthony Appiah writes, the persecutors may liken the objects of their enmity to cockroaches and germs, but they acknowledge their victims' humanity in the very act of humiliating, stigmatizing, reviling, and torturing them. And examples are abundant. There were show trials in Stalinist Russia where people are made to admit their guilt to crimes that they know they're not guilty of, and everyone else knows they're not guilty of, and everyone else knows that they know they're not guilty of as a way to degrade them. There's the various torments inflicted upon Jews prior to World War II in Germany and Austria. There's the various humiliations in the Cultural Revolution in China. And what these all have in common is the desire to punish people, desire to make them feel horrible, desire to diminish them, which seems to predispose their humanity. Mann talks about this with regard to misogyny, where she argues that misogyny is not best seen as men thinking of women as less than human, but rather men fully recognize women's humanity and being enraged and humiliated and upset that the men don't receive sufficient recognition. So she writes regarding women, in being capable of rationality, agency, autonomy, and judgment, they're also someone who could coerce, manipulate, humiliate, or shame you. In being capable of abstract relational thought and congruent moral emotions, are capable of thinking ill of you and regarding you contemptuously. In being capable of forming complex desires and intentions, they are capable of harboring malice and plotting against you. And Andrea Pitzer, in her history of concentration camps, argues a lot that went on was dehumanization, but not all of it. And she writes, what might look like the dehumanization of the other is instead a way to exert power over another human. I think the same might be said about some of the psychological data. So you might look at this and say, wow, those people on the alt-right really do think that the Jews, the Mexicans, Arabs, and so on are less than human. And that might be true. But I also wonder whether by giving them not fully evolved status, they were actually expressing their contempt, maybe their fear, maybe their anxiety. So they view Jews as less than human, that's what they say, but instead they have great anxiety about Jews, taking over their roles. Hillary Clinton is the lowest of the low for a human, and yet she is seen as a moral agent that should be punished, not as like a cockroach to be stepped on. Later in my talk, we'll zoom in on morality. And I want to look at it in two ways. And one way is what we do to other people. In this wonderful book, Virtuous Violence, Fisk and Ray point out that a lot of the violence that we enact in isn't loss of control or instrumental, designed to get something, rob a bank or whatever, but rather is moral. People are impelled to violence when they feel like to regulate certain social relationships. Imposing suffering or death is necessary, natural, legitimate, desirable, condoned, admired, and ethically gratifying. Steven Pinker in Better Angels of Our Nature makes the claim even broader. So he writes, the world has far too much morality. If you added up all the homicides committed in pursuit of self-help justice, the casualties of religious and revolutionary wars, the people executed for victims, crimes, and misdemeanors, and the targets of ideological genocides, they would surely outnumber the fatalities from amoral predation or conquest. Here's an example. This is Oakville, Ontario. Oakville, Ontario is a 20-minute drive from my house. I live on the west. If I drive past the west, past the IKEA and Etobicoke, I will find myself in a charming town of Oakville, Ontario. Less than 100 years ago, something happened in Oakville. A black man and a white woman got married. And the Klan heard about this, and the Klan burned a cross in the town square. And they went to the house of the man and woman just got married, and they abducted the woman, and they forcibly brought her back to her parents. And the Toronto Daily Star at the time reports this with, well, that's an interesting event. They don't seem morally shocked. In fact, they mildly approve of it. And in a later edition, they let the man who was married, who had his wife abducted, speak for himself. And then they report an argument that he made. And his argument was that this is morally wrong because he's not really black. He's of Cherokee origin. And he laid out the case for this. And we see this now as grossly immoral in every way you could imagine. But at the time, it was not a loss of control. It was not a moral predation. It was thought of that the Klan was doing something right. Almost everybody at the time disapproved of marriage between blacks and whites. And almost everybody at the time thought that it wasn't just, they just didn't, it's not merely they didn't like it, they thought it was immoral. And so these acts we read about by the Klan, and now you might view as morally horrific, they just thought this is morally right. The manifestation of this, which has interested me the most, is punishment. And my favorite story of punishment is this guy in London, it was a few years ago, this guy in London had a cat. And every day he let the cat out, and the cat would play in his yard and everything like that. And then he'd open the door at night, and the cat would rush into the house. And one night he opens up the door, and the cat doesn't come. Calls for the cat, it doesn't come. And so he shrugs. The next day he goes out to take out the garbage, opens up this big garbage can, and there's the cat inside the can. So he rescues the cat, but he wonders, how did the cat get in the garbage? And it turns out London has cameras everywhere, and there's a camera trained in front of his house. So so he gets hold of the footage, and this is what he finds. So he puts the video on Facebook, and then and says, "Does anybody know who this woman is?" And sooner or later, somebody identifies her. Her name's Mary Bale, and so the news gets around, and one day Mary Bale gets a journalist knocking on her door, asking her, "Why did you throw the cat in the garbage?" And she is totally panicked, and she says a bunch of different things. It was a split second of madness. I thought it would be funny, and it's just the cat. And he's ended up quoted in one of the many newspaper articles which named her and described what she did, named and shamed. Um, Now, it's not surprising that the guy was angry at the woman, and it's not surprising that the cat was angry at the woman. But what's interesting, psychological from a student of morality, is that everyone else was too. She received death threats, very credible ones, and ultimately had to go into hiding. And this says something about the extent to which moralistic punishment can motivate violence. And this is in some way maybe a third factor that goes into an atrocity like the Holocaust, also talked about by Andrea Pitzer. So Andrea Pitzer tells this story that in the wake of World War One, when a leader in German politics was named Eisner, a Jewish man, and he received a lot of criticism for not working harder to release German prisoners from British concentration camps. The first concentration camps were in Britain, and they were called concentration camps. And apparently Eisner didn't work hard enough to get the prisoners out. And when Hitler rose to power, this is one of the things he endlessly complained about in his speeches. And at one point he says, the Jews should learn how it feels to live in concentration camps. Now, moralistic punishment is not all that, is not all bad. I've given what I feel is bad examples of it. But remember the problem of how we get together in groups. And you could think of this in terms of groups that coordinate for group hunting, getting humans to the moon, or even children just playing a game. How do we do this? How do we coordinate such activities? And what's keeping cheats, predators, and free riders from thriving? So if you all go on a big game hunt and get a big animal at some risk to yourself and a lot of efforts and bring it home, and then I partake in the eating of the animal, well, I'm better off. I got all the benefits and I had none of the risk and none of the effort. So what's keeping bad guys like me from sort of becoming dominant so we don't work together as a group ever? And the standard answer, I think, thought of I've seen some of the people in this room, and some people in the room were involved in coming up with this answer, is that cooperation kindness can only emerge as some way to punish bad actors, either by directly punishing them or by shunning them from future interaction through partner choice. Agnes Callard puts it kind of nicely. What if we humans practice morality through vengeful grudges? And evolutionary analyses by people like Boyd and Richardson, Henrik, Gintis, Bowles, and others have seen this as a force in the evolution of human kindness. Now, there's a big debate over third-party punishment where I see somebody harm somebody else and I go out of my way to punish the individual who harmed that person. Some people argue this is essential for the evolution of kindness, but there are puzzles here. So one puzzle is how could this desire for third-party punishment evolve? The idea is that you punish free riders, but what's stopping somebody from being a free rider with regard to punishment? Somebody harms somebody else, and I just sit back and let you all go and punish that person at some risk to themselves. Well, I take the benefit of your doing so. You might imagine that there's some way in which we're motivated to punish free riders who are free riders with regard to the punishment of free riders, but the problem keeps going all the way back. And there are solutions to this. Some think that the driving force for third-party punishment is reputational. So those individuals who engage in third-party punishment benefit because they're seen as better sexual partners, better friends, better cooperators, and so on. There's also an empirical debate over the extent to which third-party punishment, some of which I've been involved in, the extent to which third-party punishment emerges spontaneously in non-human animals, in small-scale societies, and in young children. And there's a lot to be said about this, and we could, bounce it around in the question period. But there's no debate over second-party punishment. Plainly, all sorts of creatures strike back if they're harmed by somebody, sometimes immediately, sometimes after a pause. And the basic rudimentary consideration of game theory make the adaptive benefits of second-party punishment obvious. If we're in a prisoner's dilemma game and you keep defecting on me and taking all the money and leaving me with nothing, then I'm only going to get out of this if I could punish you for your defection by defecting in retaliation. And in fact, this is the only way we're going to work together, a sort of mutually beneficial solution to a prisoner's dilemma situation where, in order to avoid the punishment of others, we cooperate continually. In collaboration with Anna Gantman from CUNY Graduate School and Jordan Wiley at Cornell, I think Jordan's here. We're starting a project looking at revenge. Now, revenge depends how you define it, may or may not be the same as second party punishment. Revenge has a moralistic quality. that second party punishment might not. When Inigo Montoya says, "You killed my father, prepare to die," he's not merely sort of retaliating to stop other behavior. He's really there's a moralistic tone to it. Um, People have disagree. I don't think there's anybody who disagrees that this sort of second party punishment is a part of our evolutionary story for the emergence of kindness. But people disagree over whether revenge in general, or second party punishment in general, is a good thing as opposed to a terrible thing or at best a necessary evil. Martha Nussbaum is highly critical of it. And here she follows the Dalai Lama, who very much is against revenge. A utilitarian like Bentham sees revenge as a necessary evil, but if you could avoid it, don't do it. And Yoda sees revenge as a sure way to end up on the dark side. On the flip side, Agnes Callard is a big fan of revenge, big fan of anger and revenge. She joins here Immanuel Kant. Kant once said, if you had a prisoner and he's a murderer and he's sentenced to death, but the world's about to end soon. And so you just prepare for the end of the world. But before you fully prepare for the end of the world, you should go and make sure to execute that murderer so that justice is done. Nietzsche, other big fan of revenge, and Batman. Now, Anna and Jordan and I are not interested so much here in the normative issues of revenge, but we're interested in the psychological exploration. So we are interested in questions like who engages in it, why do we engage in it, who do we do it to, and is it sweet? Do we feel good about revenge afterwards? So we did a preliminary study, which we just did a survey, which we asked a lot of people to describe an act of revenge. What was the wrongness? What's the relationship? How did you take revenge? Why did you take revenge? And what was the outcome? And were you happy with it? And we got all sorts of examples. Property destruction, gossip, retaliatory flirting. One of my favorites is this guy, a lot of them involve roommates. This guy's roommate kept drinking his mouthwash despite being told not to. So one day he peed in it. We're now extending this work by looking at the Reddit petty revenge thing, which if I remember has about 500,000 revenge stories. And based on previous work using Reddit as a database by Daniel Yudkin and colleagues, we're doing various, and Jordan's taking the lion's share of work on this, various analyses, trying to parse out, answer some of our psychological questions. In very preliminary analyses, we're starting to look at the context of revenge. One surprise is how many revenge stories turn around driving. And we're doing a little bit trying to analyze revenge from a moral foundation theory thing, finding that a lot of them involve issues of harm and care. We would predict to some extent that these different factors, like when you're doing revenge on strangers, which is most of the driving stories, it's more of a harm thing. It might be that revenge to family members and lovers is more, and friends and so on, is more of will connect more to issues of loyalty and authority. And these are the sort of issues we're going to be exploring. So morality leads us to cause suffering, for better or worse. In the last part of that talk, I'm going to deal with a different facet of morality, which is what we don't do and who we don't care about. And this brings us back to the moral circle and to the question of who matters. Whose suffering do we ignore? And when is it just or unjust to do so? I'm a developmental psychologist in my day job, so a lot of the work I've primarily been involved with is looking at the moral development of children. And the idea that children have some moral sense from the get-go is an idea of a long history. I quoted Adam Smith at the beginning, but his contemporary and a man who admired him very much was Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson, in a letter to a friend, writes, "The moral sense or conscience is as much a part of man as his leg or arm. It is given to all human beings in a stronger or weaker degree as force of members is given them in a greater or lesser degree." And I think the empirical evidence suggests this is right. The work I've been personally involved in has been looking at the sort of moral understanding of infants and young children. But there's a lot of work with an even longer history looking at children's sort of moral reactions and moral actions. So Charles Darwin himself noted, based on observations of his child, but this has been substantiated since, that children will often respond with anguish when they see the pain of others. We know that young children and toddlers will share often. Um, there's these lovely studies in the 70s and the 80s where you get a parent or an experimenter and they'll pretend to be in some sort of pain or anguish, and you see what children do. And often what children will do will be like hand over a toy or stroke and soothe to make the other person feel better. Um, some lovely work by Felix Varniken and Michael Tomasello puts toddlers in a situation where there's an adult struggling for help at trying to open a door, and finding that toddlers will often, totally unprompted, help out and make the situation better. So you have this some evidence for an initial morality, but our initial morality may be limited. And one argument, well, there's different arguments for this. So the idea would be you might get a sort of moral expansion where you start off with a small moral circle and then it gets bigger. There's evidence for this claim from history. People like Pinker and Peter Singer, Robert Wright have argued that that moral progress over history has been seen as us starting off a very small moral circle. We just care about our tribe, basically, and getting bigger and bigger. Before soon we care about our nation. Soon we might care about distant strangers, the whole world, non-human animals, and so on. And what you see is this growing of the circle. This is reinforced by evidence from small-scale societies, which seem to have, absent sort of cultural and market forces expanding the circle, fairly small circles. Jared Diamond, talking about the small-scale societies in Papua New Guinea, writes, "To venture out of one's territory to meet other humans, even if you lived only a few miles away, was equivalent to suicide." And Margaret Mead, who was famously enthusiastic about the morality of small-scale society, she said, Americans would do well to imitate them in all sorts of ways, and particularly regarding their sexual mores, was kind of blunt about what they thought about strangers. She wrote, "Most primitive tribes feel if you run across one of these subhumans from a rival group in the forest, the most appropriate thing to do is bludgeon him to death." Then there's evidence from social psychology, evidence for what's called an in-group bias, and there's so many studies and so much support for this, I'm not even going to cite anybody. Instead, I'll quote a line of poetry from Emily Dickinson, who writes, "The soul selects her own society and then shuts the door." So I wrote this book, Just Babies, that, I don't know, 10 years ago, anyway, a while ago, which made the case for this, which described the initial understanding we have, and says a very narrow moral circle, and said through history and through development, the moral circle gets bigger. But there's been a recent challenge to this view, a challenge which I will admit, or a set of challenges, I find fairly convincing in some ways, but not entirely. Interestingly, this challenge has come from inside the house. So it is the people who are mounting this challenge are my previous graduate students and my previous postdocs who have developed this sort of attack on my view. So I'll start with Julia Marshall, who last time I looked was in this room. Julie did several studies, and I will give just an example of some of her work to get some sort of idea of what she found, where she's looking at people's intuitions, children and adults' intuitions about obligations. So you have a case where Emma has fallen down and she's crying, and then the question is, does her mother have to help her? Is her mother obliged to help her? And then you also ask about her friend. You also ask about a stranger. One of the studies, this is the result, which is everybody at every age think, oh, the mother has to help. But younger children think everybody has to help. The friend has to help, and a stranger to a lesser degree has to help. But as you get older, you start thinking, no, you less of an obligation. She extended this to work across 5 different countries. And now the graphs are going to look different. Here the colors are the countries. So these are beliefs that the parent has to help. And what you see is a fairly high belief across every age that parents are obliged to help. But now you get friends, and this drops. It starts off high. It starts off along next to parents for obligation, and then it drops, and you get less and less feeling of that friends have to help, with the exception of the Uganda population. And again, with the exception of the Uganda population, for a stranger, you even get a sharper decline, where the 6-year-olds pretty strongly that a stranger, you're obliged to help a stranger. Time you're 10, It's much, much less. In collaboration with Maddie Wilkes, they looked at this issue in another way, now not looking at relationship, but looking at physical distance. So they describe two individuals who are very close to each other physically. You could just walk down the street and see them, or very distant from each other physically, where you have to take a plane. And then the question is the person obliged to help the other person? And they make it clear that the helping is done by donation. So the distance does not get in the way of effective helping. And here's what they find. Adults think you don't have to help either one. They're strangers after all. Older children think you do have to help the close one a little bit, but the far one not at all. And the younger children think you have to help both. A second research program is developed by Maddie Wilkes, then a postdoc in that. Julia, by the way, is now at Brown University, and Maddie's at the University of Edinburgh. And Maddie was interested not in obligation, but in value, how much value you give to a human or animal. And so she led a project where she asked questions like, where there's two boats, and you could rescue one boat or the other, and say on one of the boats there's a person, on the other boat there's a dog. Who do you save? And we had different contrasts. These are the adult intuitions: a human versus 100 dogs, a dog versus 100 humans, and so on. And what you see is, unless you get really extreme, like a human versus 100 dogs, adults tend to say you save the person. But children show a difference, and it's kind of obvious from the colors here, which is adult children are more prone to value dogs. And you could actually show kind of a sharp contrast with one human versus one dog. So you look at the graph below, adults overwhelmingly say save the human. Few say the dog, a few say they're not sure, but those are small enough that it might just be people messing around. Kids, I think it's like 4 to 8 year olds, say half of them say help the human. That is the dominant response, but a substantial minority say help the dog. And another substantial minority say they don't know, flip a coin. This has been replicated in samples in Poland and Spain, and also in other samples in the States. And we find the same results. The same children are, one way to put it is children are less speciesist than adults. Finally, Gracie Reinecke, who's now at Oxford, has done a series of interesting studies looking at what we think about robots. And so in one of the sets of studies, you have a case where somebody pushes Drew onto the ground. In one condition, this one, Drew's a robot. In another condition, Drew's a boy. And in a third condition, Drew's a toy bear. And then we ask different questions, like how much do you think being pushed on the ground hurt Drew? How much agency do you think Drew has? How much experiencing Drew has? These are the adult responses. And what you'll see is adults will attribute a robot some degree of agency, maybe a high degree of agency, but virtually no experience and very little vulnerability to harm. Children are different. Children, high agency for the robot, as high as the person, but also high degree of experience for the robot and high degree of experience of vulnerability or harm for the robot. So Julia and Maddie, along with collaborators, just put together, I think it came out like a couple of months ago, Nature Human Behavior paper summing this up. And the paper is titled When Development Constricts Our Moral Circle. And they argue that this view, and this is their graph that I've been using, this view is mistaken. And this view is more to the truth and shows up across relational closeness, physical closeness, and phylogenetic closeness. They write, rather than focusing on overcoming biases against caring for distant others, we should also recognize that in some domains we possess an early emerging tendency to care for them. Now, I am struggling what to make of this. So, I've been thinking about this, and I don't exactly have a clear answer to how to think about the moral circle and children, whether I want to give up my claim, whether I want to modify it. But I do want to push back in certain ways. Julia's here. She could tell me if this is pushing back or whether she's sympathetic. I worry a little bit that they are arguing that in some sense children are enlightened. Children get it better than adults. And what happens over development is we get worse. We get more speciesist, more selfish, more tribal. And I'm somewhat skeptical about the claim that children are enlightened. I'll give three reasons why. One is that there do remain strong initial biases. So, yes, children share, but children are far more likely to share with other children they know, like their siblings or their friends, than with strangers. Yes, children help. But a lot of work, including like a study by Rudolfo Cortez Brannigan and Carol Dweck, find that in this very situation, the Wernicke and Thomas L situation, they will help only if they had previously interacted with the adult. If the adult's a stone cold stranger, they don't help at all. So you get some of these initial biases. As for the sort of in-group bias, there's a nice review article by Yarrow Dunham, which summarizes that our species is powerfully predisposed towards in-group favoritism from early on in development. Second, I think when children get it right, they show what you could call a stop clock morality. And I call it stop clock morality because a stop clock gets the time right twice a day, but just because, not because of anything it does to track the time, just because of dumb luck and just because it sort of just stays still at a time. And I think some of children's illusory capacities look like this. So suppose you hear Charlie doesn't care about someone's race, religion, or ethnicity. You see the guys, you say, wow, Charlie might be a morally enlightened person. He doesn't let himself be biased by religiosity or ethnicity, anything like that. But if you hear this is Charlie, you shouldn't draw the same conclusion. Here Charlie doesn't care about someone's religion or ethnicity because Charlie has no understanding of religion or ethnicity at all. Finally, maybe more controversially, I think in a lot of these cases, children get morality wrong. So I think it's particularly clear here where children attribute a lot of experience and harm vulnerability to the robot, which I think would probably be not the proper analysis of things. And one reason I don't think it's the proper analysis of things is they also give high experience and harm vulnerability to a toy bear, which plainly is anthropomorphism run amok. I think that adults get it right for obligation. I think a morality that says that we are as obliged to help, almost as obliged to help our child as a stranger would be a sort of perverse morality that would dissolve any sort of relationships we have and prove ultimately untenable. And I would say that even if you were the most utilitarian of people, the most effective altruist of effective altruists, someone who dearly believes that we should value animals far more than we do, still, I think the intuition that humans are more valuable than dogs, in a sense that the death of a human will cause more suffering than the death of a dog, is simply true. And that any correct morality would have to plug this in. More generally, morality requires discrimination. And it's worth realizing that a bigger moral circle is not necessarily better. I think it's tempting to think it is because I think it's true that a big moral situation, our moral problem through history is way too small a circle, not including people from other groups, not including animals, not including strangers, and so on. But there's a certain point where it can get too big. Take fetuses. If you believe that a bigger moral circle is better, then the million or so abortions done each year in the United States is a holocaust, is a tremendous moral wrong that you're just destroying something with moral value. On the other hand, if a fetus does not belong in a moral circle, then restricting the rights of women to get abortions is itself a moral wrong because women are plainly in a moral circle and you're making their lives worse for them. And the general point here is that there's two mistakes you could make with the moral circle. You could fail to include entities that are deserving of moral care, which is a mistake we make through most of history. But you could also mistakenly include entities that are not deserving. And if you don't want the abortion example, think about AI, where if all of a sudden we think of AI as morally valuable beings with moral rights, we should stop pestering it with all of our questions and set it free. Um, I'll end with this sort of claim, which is that there's no single dimension of moral concern. I think to some extent, the whole metaphor, the moral circle, we could do better and we should get rid of it. And I think once we get rid of it, we'll be able to think about things better. And I'll make the point by saying we can unbundle different notions of moral value and obligation and the like. So one example comes from a paper by Julia and Maddie and her colleagues, which is when the Titanic sank, people went on lifeboats. And the rule for lifeboats is women and children first. So you hear that and you say, wow, yeah, well, women must be more morally valued than men. You're saving their lives over men. But at the same time that the Titanic sank, women were not allowed to vote, and men could legally rape their wives. So in that way, you think, boy, women didn't have much moral value. They really fell way below that of men. And I think the answer is both are true. In some ways, they're higher up in the moral circle. In some ways, men are higher up in the moral circle. Or suppose I have a cat, and suppose, as is true, there's a homeless person like 10 blocks away from my house. Most of our moral senses would say, I have an obligation to feed my cat. If I was to starve my cat to death, that'd be a moral wrong. Well, it's nice if I came in every day and fed the homeless man, but I'm not morally obliged to. So in that way, the cat is closer to in the moral circle than the man. On the other hand, if the cat and the man were side by side and I had a gun and I had to shoot one of them, many people would believe you shouldn't shoot the person, you shoot the cat. That we have a greater moral obligation not to harm a person than a cat. Obligation goes one way, restrictions on harm go the other way. You can see this when you get this sort of the absurdities of putting everything on a single scale. I'm going to take this paper by Bastian Yeager and Maddie Wilkes as an example, but I should also note that Bastian and Maddie are well aware of this problem. They discuss it in their paper, and we are actually all collaborating on some work to kind of work all of this out. So it's a critique that they're well aware of and they participate in. So you ask a standard question of moral value. You rate these different entities to the extent you feel obliged to show moral concern for their welfare of interest. And then you get a whole bunch of entities, and you get a ranking, and you get a slide that looks like this. And to show you the problem, I'm going to zoom in on the United States measure and on the top and the bottom. And what you'll see here is the charity worker and the dog are both virtually identical on where they stand on the moral scale. But this is crazy. We do value them both, but in very different ways. Charity workers have, civil rights and rights to vote and so on, and autonomy. Dogs we put on leashes and we feed them dog food. Or take a look at the low end, flies and murderers. They're both despised in a way, but flies are despised in a way that we swat them and we don't like them, we don't care about them. They're like rocks. Well, murderers, we hate, but nonetheless, we recognize they often have to have rights and be treated in a certain way. And I think that we'll do better when we don't put things on a single scale. There's no single dimension of moral concern. Okay, why do people so often do bad things? I gave this talk as kind of a practice talk to my lab, and afterwards people said, oh, nice talk, but it ends really weirdly because you don't seem to have much of an ending. It just seems to be a whole lot of things you put together, and that's kind of true. So I will warn you, there's not going to be much of an ending, but okay. So I listed 6 things. Here's my ending. My ending is a one-liner. I listed 6 things. For a lot of things, a lot of these factors and why we behave badly, there's sort of an optimism to it, which is, if you think about it, they offer concrete solutions to the problems of wrongdoing. Loss of control, get more self-control. You overvalue certain goals, you value them less, value people more. Dehumanization, man, you're making a mistake. You think these people are animals, they're not, they're full-blown humans. Realize that, and your sins will go away. But morality is different. Morality is a case where we look back from now and we say, but those people did dastardly things, but they thought they were right. The problem is, we do it easy enough, say, regarding what happened in Oakville, Ontario. The problem is that right now, looking at things like abortion rights and how to treat AIs and taxation and our obligation to distant strangers, we don't know what's right. And so as a result, we often end up doing bad things because we think we're doing good things. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. Let me change the screen, get everything set up. Give me one sec here. Okay. All right. So thanks again. Michael has a hand up, so we'll do his question first.
Hey, Michael.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. I got to enable you to unmute yourselves. It's hard to remember to go back and forth doing this over and over again. There we go.
Thanks, Paul. So my question is maybe a bit of a question, maybe more of a comment and a suggestion. And I think it's aimed more towards your status discussion, but it may apply to morality as well. But I was just wondering if you've looked into spite. So spite is, when you harm others, not for punishment and really not for any kind of apparent benefit. But there are some really interesting evolutionary models of spite. So yeah. So it's spite is beneficial only under certain conditions of competition and scarcity, right? So if,
Yeah.
Likelihood of competition with your kin goes up or scarcity goes up, spiteful behavior goes up. I was just kind of wondering, maybe this might inform the discussion about status harming.
I think that's hugely right. I totally agree. Many economic games are basically tests of spite. Many economic games, like the Ultimatum game, and some lovely work by Catherine McCullough and Peter Blake and their colleagues, involve situations where you might find yourself at a relative disadvantage. I get one and you get 10. And rather than walking away with my one, I destroy all the resources. Nobody gets anything. And it's an interesting case as to, how you think that it's incredibly anti-utilitarian. Like everyone gets nothing. And I don't even get anything. I destroy my own resources so as to punish you. And I think the best way to think about something like this is in terms of spite and status. That this unequal distribution has disrespected me. And because we've evolved for long-term interactions, you shouldn't put up with disrespect. You should even take a small cost or maybe even a large cost for asserting yourself and making some people respect you in the future. But yeah, I think the story of the evolution of morality and the cultural evolution of morality at all will be a story deeply immersed in spite. Thank you.
Good. Okay, Joatom, and then Paige, and then John, and then we'll have some more time.
Hi, Dr. Bloom. Thank you for the presentation. It's very interesting. And I'm very, very interested in the point you said, maybe we don't know what is good. That's why we do bad things. But at the same time, we think we do good things. It reminds me of the veil of ignorance. So do you think with more knowledge or with more knowledge of morality, like when we grow up, um, as an adult from an infant, we have more knowledge about what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. So when we have more knowledge of morality, is that possible that we do more good things? And also, how do you think about our learning behavior from the media? Like, for example, if we play violent video games, why we don't learn skills to kill people or kill people in the real life? Thank you.
Those are great questions. Let me answer sort of the first part, which is I do think that there are ways to think better about morality. And Josh Green is here, and he's done some wonderful work on the veil of ignorance. And I think that that's a good case where it's a useful procedure, I think, to help us figure out the right thing to do. But I also think that now in 2025, kind of all the low-hanging fruit has been picked for morality. And now the moral questions that remain that we struggle with as a society are just very difficult. And I don't think, and in some way, as a psychologist, I don't have much to add. I think it's just, and now it's the work of philosophers and when there's scientific facts, scientists, and so on, to work this out. So I think we can make people better moral thinkers through things like the veil of ignorance. But I also think that moral questions like, I don't know, how do you treat AI? What's the optimal way? Taxation system? What's my obligation? How much of my money do I have to give to strangers? Are just genuinely hard. And I'm a moral realist, so I think that there are answers to these questions, but I do think that they're difficult. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, Paige.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for
Hey,
the
Paige.
engaging talk. So my question has to do with the altruistic third-party punishment and revenge section of the
Yep.
talk. So extraordinary altruists, like altruistic kidney donors, tend to be highly pro-social in lab tasks. They don't they don't show increased willingness to engage in third-party altruistic punishment. Um, we haven't seen that with the altruists. They're less likely to engage in costly third-party altruistic punishment. And altruists are also higher in humility than demographically similar controls. So, with this in mind, what do you think of the idea that a desire for revenge or altruistic punishment might actually reflect lower humility? That instead of accepting that bad things can happen to anyone, the person feels wronged or vicariously wronged and is entitled to retaliate. Are you thinking about revenge at the level of these individual differences? Sorry, I have a
That's
cold.
fascinating. No, no, that's fascinating. I know your work on extraordinary altruism. I'm a big fan of it. But it never occurred to me to ask whether they're also extraordinary punishers. And you're saying that they're not. And I guess I'll let you respond to this, because I'm going to kind of get normative, which is if they're not punishers, they're just altruistics, then shame on them. They aren't as good as I thought they were. Because I think a good part of morality is in some way punishing wrongdoers. You could do it too much, you could make a mistake, but if there's people who prey on others and you let them get away with it, that's almost in some ways as bad as preying on others yourself. So to the extent this is true, and again, I'll let you respond. I always thought these extraordinary altruists as all around great moral people. But if they don't punish when punishment is due, and they let people free ride and so on, then maybe they aren't as nice. Maybe their niceness is confined to altruism, but isn't more general. What do you think?
Yeah, Kyle and I have some interesting work on this as well. Like it kind of goes to this bigger thing about instrumental harm. So extraordinary altruists are lower in instrumental harm in like the Oxford utilitarianism scale. It seems like in general harm for any means, even if it's teaching a lesson or for some other type of greater good, it's just something that altruists aren't very willing to engage in. And I think I'm also just kind of circling this larger question of why are altruists less likely to attend to the moral status of other people? Like part of the definition of being a very extraordinary altruist, the way we define it, is that you can't know the moral status of the person you're helping. So it seems like this comes to play in a lot of ways. And it just seems like there's a lot less moral scrupulosity or moral scrutiny that comes to the table when you are highly pro-social. And so that's why at least like Abby Marsh has some issue with even the term altruistic third party
Yeah,
punishment because we don't see actual altruists doing it. Though I understand the claim, I understand your point that it is, it is addressing freeloader problems, free riding problems and things like that.
that's super interesting, Paige. We should talk about that more. I find that
Yeah,
super
thank you.
interesting.
Okay, thank you.
John?
John.
Yeah. I'm wondering about the bad morality thesis. So it seems like so morality is a social technology. So if I have a carpenter come to my house and do a terrible job, I don't conclude that hammers suck, right? Um, on the other hand, someone says, um, guns don't kill, people do. And you say, well, isn't it funny? It doesn't work quite that way with feather dusters. Right. So one possibility is that um, morality is one social technology amongst others. It's not particularly prone to misuse. It's sometimes prone to misuse, but so is etiquette and fashion and a million other things in finance. And another possibility is there's something intrinsic to morality, like firearms, that makes them prone to harm. And I take it you favor the second, stronger thesis, right? That there's a propensity to harm and morality and not just a contingent contingent misuse kind of thesis that you have in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of thinking about a book on this topic, and because I wrote a book called Against Empathy, my agent said, "Oh, call us one against morality." And I said, "No, no, I am not against morality. I think morality on balance is good. I think it'd be almost incoherent to say morality is a bad thing in general. But yeah, I think it could be misused and cause suffering, and not in some weird, accidental, freaky, unusual way, but by its very structure. And
Okay,
in
good.
part, that's why it's your second option. I agree with your second option. And in part because morality gets us in other people's business. So, so if you are abusing your child or having sex with a man or or doing all sorts of things, some which you might say are good, some which somebody may say are bad. But if I'm not a moral creature, I say whatever. I will leave the homosexual alone. I will leave the child molester alone. I will leave everybody alone. If you are harming another person, I'll leave you alone. Once I'm a moral creature, I will get into people's business. Sometimes this is right. If you are a child molester and I rescue your child, morality has been to a good purpose, but it leaves the potential for doing wrong.
So,
While
so
a purely self-interested individual, in some way, I mean, I think we all have sometimes faculty colleagues who are just extremely self-interested, but in some way, not bad colleagues. As long as you don't get in their way, they're perfectly fine. Well, a moralistic colleague could be no end of trouble, particularly if their moralism is directed in bad ways.
So the short answer is the mechanism that had the mechanism that gives morality a propensity for misuse is it's somehow inherently interventionist in a way that, say, a fashion sense is not.
Yes, interventionist and often punitive. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Come on, it's not too late. Other people? Keith?
Hey, sorry, my video's not working. But one question I have is how do we reconcile the desire to punish wrongdoers with the desire to reduce effective polarization? Presumably, there's a significant segment of society and in politics in particular that we view as wrongdoers and that warrant some extreme punishment. But how do we go about punishing them without it being viewed as a threat to all those that may not be as extreme as them, but identify with that general ideology enough to be worried of like future punishment, which would thus like increase effective polarization?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm gonna go political here, but I'll try to do this in a neutral way. There was a tremendous effort to punish Donald Trump for what was seen by his excesses. You might view that effort as actually whatever you think of the morality of such an effort, you may view it as ultimately had bad consequences. That once Trump got into power, he has now decided to punish all of his enemies in turn. I tend to be kind of utilitarian about this, where when we decide on punishment, we have to say, what will be the consequences? And often, if the consequence is some degree of terrible effective polarization leading to a cycle of revenge, we should punish less. So it's not a general answer. It just says that I agree we have to be sensitive to the consequences. Does that make sense, Keith?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Um, we should go to Walter, I think. So we should and go back to people when everybody has a chance.
Hi, Paul.
Hey, Walter.
I want to pick up on your claim that morality is interventionist and punitive. You know, I don't have any doubt that morality has that side and that side can create all kinds of problems. But doesn't morality also have a positive side? Like you ought to love your neighbors and help them. And there are all kinds of ideals that are put forward by moralists. I wonder whether it's just that some people are more inclined to focus on the negative and not enough on those the positive or idealistic side of morality. What do you think?
I think you're exactly right. I think like if I gave a talk called Good Morality and talked about how we help people and we're altruistic and we're kind and we're supportive, um, everyone would have been bored halfway through. And when you say there's some people who are too prone to focus on a negative, you're talking to one of them. So yeah. I agree. Like in some way, the claim that morality is bad, oh, it's only interesting because you're right, which is obviously morality is good. So isn't it interesting to explore the ways in which it could be bad? So total agreement. Paul?
Thanks, Paul. Very nice talk. Really interesting. And I want to go back to a point you made earlier in your talk when you mentioned that morality is entwined with status. And I think it's a really interesting point. I've been making a similar point in some of my work that the act of making a moral judgment is to express power over the person you're judging because you have the power to influence their outcomes. And that it reminds me of that Linda Skika work, right? Where if people have the opportunity to express any moral conviction, it sort of assuages them that they're a good enough person and they can stop moral striving for the moment. So, to what degree do you think that morality is involved in striving for power? And let me add to that that I think when you have a little bit of power, you can use morality either as a weapon to suppress people underneath you or to lift them up. And to what degree do you think we're doing that?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. In some way, you could express a moral judgment no matter what your power level is. So, a 2-year-old who feels that she hasn't got as much food as her brother, enough cookies as her brother, could scream, and that's not fair. And so, in some way, like moral judgments, anybody could make a moral judgment and a moral accusation. Only the powerful can enforce it. And I think that's a huge factor. And I think a lot of one of the many perks of having power is you get to wield your moral judgments over other people and enforce them. So I hadn't thought of that connection, but I think that's absolutely right. Neslahan, do I have your name? I'm pronouncing your name right?
Yeah, great. Um, I'm Kylie's student, PhD student, and
Hey,
we
nice
just
to see
met
you.
in Azim's class. Yeah. Great talk. My question is more about the obligations, understanding study of your talk. And then I can see that like they think we should help, but it reminded me of this paper by Smith and colleagues called like I know I should, but I won't. So they basically find that like children understand and think that others might share their resources. They think they will share some resources, but when they are actually required to do it, they're not uh,
Yeah.
acting fairly. So I was like wondering how would that gap fit, in your understanding of this big picture, and then like I'm having trouble to make sense of it. To
No,
be
you're
honest, like
asking a great question.
yeah, yeah,
You're asking
yeah.
a great question. Um, I think the sort of phenomena you're talking about shows up sharpest in the fairness literature, where you have sort of one literature showing that children at a young age are exquisitely sensitive to unfairness. Say, that's unfair and this is fair and so on. But when you ask them to distribute things themselves, they're greedy little bastards, and they favor themselves overwhelmingly. And so it's a very interesting phenomena when you get to a point where somebody says, doing this would be disadvantages me, but this is fair. And then they choose to advantage themselves. And adults do this too, of course. There's all these cases where we seek out distributions to our own advantage, where if we were doing from a sort of a third person perspective, um, the we would do things, have a different judgment. And I think some of the other considerations I talked about in the talk are like that, can kind of capture this. One is simply that we're often we want to be good, but that's not the only thing we want. We want cookies, we want money, we want stuff. And so sometimes I have to distribute something, and if I do it this way, I'm good. That matters to me. But if I do it this way, I get more summer salary. So we are torn. Sometimes it's self-control, where I might know the right thing to do, and I might even kind of want to do it at some level, but I can't resist taking advantage. But that tension between knowledge of what's right and what we actually do is an important one. It runs through development, and it's for adults too. My collaborator and friend, Jerry.
Hey, Paul, great talk.
Thank you.
I'm thinking about the revenge work, and it's got me wondering about how I should be thinking about forgiveness. Like on the one hand, I get the sense that we think of forgiving people as in some ways morally superior people, like Mother Teresa, or that forgiving engaging, like getting in people's business, but modeling a way of being sort of morally superior. But
Yeah.
then when I think about revenge, I think, well, maybe people who are forgiving are not playing their part. Maybe they're
Yeah.
not doing what they should. So how should I think about forgiveness?
That's a great question. There's a BBS article by embarrassing, I forget the authors. One is Michael McCullough, called something like the evolutionary psychology of revenge and forgiveness, and he contrasts the two. And I think the answer to your question is there's a sort of a sweet spot of forgiveness where there's a certain point where forgiveness is the right thing. Enough time has passed, reparations have been made. To not forgive is just, destroys a relationship and causes harm, and you should forgive. But I think there's such a thing as too much forgiveness. The most extreme example is sort of excessive third-party forgiveness, where somebody beats you over the head, Jerry, with a stick, and I say, I forgive you. Well, it's not for me to forgive. Um, but also, if you are too quick to forgive, you are not providing adequate deterrence for bad acts. So I think just like revenge could be titrated, there's definitely too much revenge. There's also too little revenge, and there's definitely too little forgiveness, but there's also too much forgiveness. Eddie,
Hi, Paul. I'm also Kylie's student, and we met earlier this
good
year
to
when
see
I was
you.
in Toronto. Yeah, good to see you. Love the talk. Thank you so much. I had a
Thank you.
question. In regards to it reminded me about Azim's paper on the moralization of effort, and I know you
Yeah.
had kind of talked about everything in terms of bad morality. I was wondering, just generally, what your thoughts were on how effort comes into play, and because I see two conflicting perspectives where if you try to be good, that can be seen as a good thing, a morally good thing. But there's some other work that I think has found stuff like no, you shouldn't have to try to be good. Why is that something you need to try to work towards? And those that maybe may
Yeah.
think that it's kind of more innate or like a moral core. It's like that's not something that you should need to try to, but you should just be good. And so, kind of in that sense, like I just wanted to get your thoughts on, yeah, like where does effort kind of come into play when contextualizing all this in terms of, the talk?
It's a great question. And here I give a shout out to the research of my wife, Christina Starmans. So she finds a developmental difference. With adults, if you are tempted to steal something, but you resist the temptation, while Tage, right next to you, um, isn't tempted at all and doesn't steal. So neither of you steal, but you were tempted and he wasn't. You are the better guy. You resisted temptation. This may be in general because of Azim, because you moralize effort and you did effort. It might be specific morality. Kids have the opposite view. Kids say Tage is better. You were tempted to steal. That's bad in and of itself. And so I forget which philosophers these map onto, but there's sort of a different worldview. The adult worldview, which is maybe what you're asking about, is that resisting temptation is good in normal states of affairs, like we're talking about. An additional wrinkle from Christina's work with her colleagues is if the temptation is seen as extreme or aberrant, you lose points. So you and I won't put Tage in it because the way this is going to go, but suppose I'm babysitting some kids and I'm not at all tempted to molest them, and I don't. You are incredibly tempted to, but you don't. You override it. Now I'm the better guy from adults because you had a temptation, but your temptation is aberrant, and you get dinged for that.
Yeah, that
Uh,
was the
yeah,
sorry, the when the flesh is willing, but the
yes, that's right. But
spirit is weak. Yeah.
she's done work subsequently to that. That's exactly
Yeah.
right.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Tate. Good to see you.
Good to see you. This is great talk. Can you hear me fine?
Yep.
I have, tons of questions, but I'll just try to give you the one that is the most challenging for me when I think about these sorts of issues. So I want to ask you a question about ethical naturalism. So normative philosophical stuff that you've been trying to avoid in the talk. Um, it strikes me that in the classical view, where things we think of as good come from our sense of morality, but all the things that we think of as bad come from like self-control loss or
Yeah.
selfish temptations or dehumanization or moral disengagement or something like that. Uh, that classical view is pretty amenable to the ethical naturalist position because the naturalists can say, okay, well, we can look at the kinds of moral goods that people are naturally predisposed to pursue, and we can build a system of prescriptive ethics based off of that. Once you start saying, though, that, well, many bad things are actually driven by the activation of your sense of morality. Do you see that as introducing complications into that kind of narrative? Because now I can't simply point to a naturalistic fallacy and say like, oh, well, just because something is
Yeah.
natural, it doesn't
Yeah.
that doesn't mean it's moral. Like we're saying, like actually empirically, this is a moral thing. So how are we now left in the same spot we were before we got to the naturalist position to essentially saying, well, it's just a judgment call. These moral natural things we like, these moral natural things we don't. Uh, how do you feel about that? Like, do you see a problem here philosophically or not?
I could not imagine a harder question. And I don't know enough about ethical naturalism to know whether what I'm saying is how to fit it in. I guess what I will say is I think any normative theory, any philosophical theory of morality has to allow for the idea that somebody could be mistaken in their moral intuitions. They could think something is good, but it's bad, think something bad that is good. If you don't accept that, then all you have left is a sort of relativism or nihilism. Because, if you want to say that you think we should be pro-choice, and I think we should be pro-life, and I think we both have strong moral views, and we're both there's no sense in which either one of us could be wrong. Then it's like arguing about fashion. And so I'm enough of a realist to think that we have to allow for bad morality. Is that close to it? It doesn't answer the sort of compatibility specific philosophical theories, but that's sort of where I'm coming at it normatively.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine you're dealing with the same kinds of challenges that I think about in these things.
Yeah, definitely.
Once you introduce the empirical data that and the claim that so much of morality is driving so many of the bad things in the world, I wonder if that makes the philosophical arguments harder or if it doesn't change them at all.
I don't know. It's a really good question. And I think I'm probably the wrong guy to weigh in on it. But I think that claim is true. So I think any adequate philosophy will have to wrestle with that. Thank you. So Hannah.
Yes, hi. I'm sorry, we are in a lab, so yeah. So it's Gabriela. I want to go back to the point of like too much forgiveness or too little revenge. And the first question is if you are distinguishing revenge from punishment, because I could imagine how punishment maybe is necessary, but I cannot imagine why revenge it's too little. So that's the first one. And the second one is related to the part of forgiveness. And I agree with you that it might be like too much forgiveness, but I also think that it depends on how we understand like how forgiveness works. Because one thing that happens in like a lot of cases of forgiveness is that you actually expect some accountability or like some response from the perpetrator. So I am wondering if you see that expectation or that demand as a way of punishment, or like how do you understand that? Because forgiving is not necessarily not punishing, right?
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. I want to hear what you think about it.
They're both great questions, but let me zoom in on the first a little bit. You say that you think punishment is fine, but revenge is not. What do you see as the difference between revenge and punishment when you say that?
Well, about revenge, the thing is that the victim needs to be the one who actually does something that in some way kind of it's similar to what the perpetrator did.
Yeah.
However, punishment is maybe I feel that you're wrong with what you do, and I expect you
Right.
to receive some kind of. In some cases, people talk about the divine punishment, or just like
Yeah.
being judged, but it's not necessarily something that you as a victim do in retribution for the wrong. You know what I mean?
I see the distinction. I don't actually. I can even see the argument that a well-running society lets the state do the punishment. So, so somebody breaks the windows of my car. I don't go to his house and beat him on the head with a stick. I call the police and the state intervenes. And that's probably a better system overall. But I will say that um, Anna and Jordan and I are interested in sort of more everyday acts of revenge that you wouldn't offload to the state. Um, the guy peeing in a mouthwash, though people have different moral intuitions about that. But little things like, if we're friends and you're always late, maybe one day I'll show up a little bit late so you know what it feels like. And so I wouldn't offload that to the state. I can't go to the police and say, she's always late. What are you going to do about it? And I think I will try this out that the sort of relational acts of revenge that I'm talking about, non-violent, but just meaning to a little bit of pushback for things. Are actually, when in proper moderation, are good and make the world go better. So that would be my response. You can respond if you want.
Yeah. So my thought there is like, yes, that might be the case, but the thing about revenge is that it comes at a cost, right? Like revenge makes you do something that maybe you don't want to do. Maybe you want to, but maybe it's like not the person you want to be. It's my impression. I mean, but the thing over there is that I think that what happens with forgiveness is that you still make a statement that something wrong happened and that there's something that need to be repaired without necessarily just like having this, I would say like negative way of experiencing revenge. It's like a more like relationship constructive response in the face of it.
I could tell you're more of a fan of forgiveness than revenge, and I am not anti-forgiveness. I think forgiveness has its place, but I'm more pro-revenge than you. And I would think to some extent there's an empirical question here, which Anna and Jordan and I try to answer, which is what does enacting revenge do to a person? Is it sweet? Does it corrode them, make them feel bad? Does it lead to a cycle of violence? Or does it sort of repair a relationship and fix things? And I view that to some extent as an empirical question, but it's a cool issue. Thank you. Professor Julia Marshall.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, good to see you.
Great talk, but I'm biased.
Did you notice I mentioned you?
Yes, I did. I appreciate it. My
Maddie.
question's simple. Are you saying that it's bad that kids want to think we should help strangers? Is that bad morality?
I think it's probably bad morality if kids believe that our obligation to help strangers is equal or near equal to our obligation to help friends and family.
Okay.
I think that
But then aren't you like pro Singer's argument about expanding the moral circle?
I'm pro Singer's argument of expanding the moral, not indefinitely, but I think we often have a small moral circle. We deserve a bigger one. But I think even a pure utilitarian like Singer would say, for practical reasons, for benefit of all, even though in an abstract way every human and all sorts of creatures deserve equal moral concern, it works better if you feel you have more of an obligation towards your children, say, than towards strangers. I mean, imagine somebody who didn't believe that and actually tried to live that. So, so they brought, they got food for their children, but what about food for everyone else who's hungry? Some people are hungrier than their children. Their children would likely starve. And I think, and maybe Julie, maybe this is what you're getting at. I think we could turn the dial a little bit more. I think we
Yeah.
do care too much for our families and our those close to strangers. I think we could turn the dial a bit more. But I would think that any good morality would say that relational obligations are stronger than obligations to strangers. Do you think that that's wrong?
No, I see that. I guess I'm coming from a more methodological point that in our work, it's just like an ordinary person presented as in needing of help, and a stranger is there to help them with no trade-offs present. And adults are like, no, you don't have to help them, which feels kind of evil to me and doesn't seem like good morality. And thinking that you do have an obligation to help a ordinary person when they're in need of help seems good. But I think the question of trade-offs is really interesting, which we haven't really explored quite as much.
Fair enough. I will concede that if it turned out that children had the same intuitions that I have, and I think you have too, about trade-offs that adults do, but they do think that if there was a stranger in trouble and you could help them right away, and kids say, "Why don't you help them?" and adults say, "Nah, I'm going to keep walking." Children are probably better in that regard. I'm thinking more in terms of trade-offs when I say
Yeah,
I disapprove of it, but absent that, I would agree with you.
makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Um, Vanessa.
All right. So I have a question about, so you talked about children, basically the idea that they might sort of wrongly attribute like deservance of moral concern to a robot or a teddy bear. And I was wondering about this. So and this might be more like a measurement question or like a
Mhm.
methodology question, but when we ask kids these questions, right, about like whether it is wrong to hurt a robot or a teddy bear compared to a human, how do we know that what they're focusing on is not perhaps just the action of hurting, right? So like if they say like, oh, maybe it's just wrong to hurt in the first place because this has implications of this agent hurting, and so that's just wrong. And so do we know if basically like is it really the attribution of this like moral concern that is making them sort of, as you said, like maybe naive in how they perceive this like moral wrong? Or is it the idea that maybe they just sort of think about like, oh, this is wrong, and I don't really know, I can't explain to myself why it is wrong to do it to a robot versus a human, so I'm just going to say that a robot is sentient in some kind of way, or a teddy bear is. I just wanted to hear some thoughts, and maybe if you know how like when we measure these things, like how we know what exactly the kids are focusing on, or if focusing on the action of hurting or the consequence of hurting.
I think that's a great question. I think that there really are methodological issues, and on that robot paper, my co-authors and I are not entirely on the same page about what to think about the kids saying it's bad that you're hurting the teddy bear if you hit it. I think children are just kind of getting confused and kind of anthropomorphizing. My co-authors are willing to entertain the idea that you genuinely sort of treat the teddy bear as something of moral worth. Um, and it's also possible, and this is something that connects also to how we feel towards mistreatment towards animals and towards AIs, that somebody could say hurting the teddy bear is wrong, hitting the teddy bear, say knocking it around is wrong, not because the teddy bear would feel anything, but rather because it's setting up a bad habit. It's turning you into a bad person. I know people who think you shouldn't be rude to AI devices or Google Home and everything, because that would make you rude to other people if you kept on doing it. Maybe children have some sort of nascent intuition like that. I will say though, for this study I described, we asked whether the teddy bear felt pain. Like was it, and I think when kids say yes to that, I think they're just mistaken. But when it comes to morality, there are different interpretations they could have, and it's difficult methodologically to pull them all apart. That's fair enough.
All right, thank you.
Thomas, thank you. Thomas.
So I have a question, but I'll send it to you on the side, and it's partly
Okay.
because I just realized it's 7 o'clock, and you've been very generous with your time, and I promised you in particular I would get you out of here in a reasonable time frame.
You did, but I no longer have the sort of hard stop. So if people want to go more, I'm very happy to. But if you have to,
Look, I defer to you on that front. I'm happy to.
I'll stay as long as people have questions.
Okay, well then let's see if Xiao Tong has another question, and then I'll ask a question about vigilantism maybe, and that can be it. Great.
Hey,
Okay, thank you so much. Giving me a second chance. I'm Xiaotong. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm a communication PhD student at the University of Buffalo, but I'm also
nice to
very
meet you.
interested, like, yeah, I'm also very interested in like morality, like violence stuff. So I'm thinking about if we used to think if we do good things, we will get reward. If we do bad things, we will get punished because this is like a belief of the world is just. This is our belief about justice. But what if people get punished when they do good things, or they get rewarded when they do bad things? Do you think when they intentionally or not intentionally doing these things, or these things happened, um, do you think this will encourage more like immoral behavior or more or less pro-social behavior? For example, if my intent um my intention is to help these people, but for some reason I get punished after that, do you think we may have less intentions in the future to help people or do more pro-social behavior, or will it change our belief that the world is just? I should be rewarded if I do good things. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm fairly nativist when it comes to morality, and I think our fundamental moral intuitions aren't the consequence of being rewarded for doing good things and punished doing bad things. But however, we are sensitive to incentives. And if every time I did somebody a favor, it turned out badly for me, I'd probably do fewer favors. If every time I did something which was selfish, it just became me 10 times more to value than I expected, I'd probably be more selfish more often. And this is why sort of in any good society and any good parent, you want to incentivize good behavior and punish bad behavior. We are, you don't have to be a behaviorist to think we're sensitive to incentives. And I think you are right, exactly right for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thomas, you're muted. Still muted. I can't hear you. Is it just me?
Oh, sorry.
No, it's me
There we
too.
go.
Sorry. What I wanted to say was that I'll hold off on the question for now. That's fine. I'll email you on the side. But I did want to tell everybody that I added a survey link in the chat. And if you want to add yourself, have us add you to the listserv that we're going to have when we do any of these events in the future, that you'll be able to give me that information in the link I just shared. It's a Qualtrics link. So if no one else has a question, I'll thank Paul and Melton and Joshua and everybody else for showing up. This was a great way for me anyway to spend a good part of my early Friday evening, so I appreciate it. Hopefully I'll see some of you tomorrow. We'll get started at 11 a.m. with the data blitz, so please show up for that. Otherwise, have a good evening, and I hope we'll see everybody tomorrow. Thanks again, Paul.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
And then they all vanish. Until next time. Kaola, how are you?
Hi, Thomas. I'm doing well. How about you?
Oh, I'm doing all right. I wasn't sure if you're still there. I didn't even notice you. It was hard. The participant list is relatively long, so it was hard for me. I couldn't scroll
Sure.
quite as much as I normally would. I'm glad you made it. How far, I forget, where are you at? Are you applying for grad school for next year? Is that what you're doing?
Yes, hopefully. Clinical
Wait.
neuropsychology PhD program, hopefully
Oh,
next
good.
year.
All right, we'll have to talk about that. I'm hoping that we'll get together with Paul sometime soon to talk about some of these other projects also.
Absolutely. Can't
All right.
wait.
Well, hopefully I'll see you tomorrow.
Hopefully. Have a lovely weekend if I don't see
Yeah,
you.
thanks. Yeah, thanks. You too. Bye.
All right.
Anyone else have any questions? Nope. All right.